The draft Firearms Control Amendment Bill continues to draw mixed reactions from various concerned parties.
The government revealed proposed changes to the law that would remove self-defense as a valid reason to own a firearm.
There are an estimated 4.5 million licensed firearms in South Africa, and the vast majority of those are kept for self-defense purposes.
In one of the most violent countries in the world, where the Commissioner of Police openly admitted that law enforcement forces are unable to fulfill their mandate, the government is pushing to amend the Firearms Controls Act to prevent citizens from owning firearms for self-defense.
Gun owners are furious as government revealed proposed changes to the law that would remove self-defense as a valid reason to own a firearm.
The right to defend yourself is enshrined in the Constitution.
There's been outrage in some quarters following a proposed change to the Firearms Control Act. Many fear it will have a devastating impact on citizens trying to protect themselves against criminals and gender-based violence.
I've been a victim of 2 attacks, and if I didn't have my gun with me, who knows what might have happened.
It bewilders the mind to think that they would want to disarm us.
Farm killings had reached dangerously high levels in South Africa.
People do not trust the police anymore, and I don't think that is something very crucial.
This is the same police service that has just cut the visible policing budget. That's the budget that looks after you and I by 3.9 billion, and at the same time has increased the VIP protection budget. That's the part of the police that looks after the minister and his pals.
Police corruption has also contributed to the number of illegal firearms, with some police officers accused of selling confiscated guns to criminals.
The owning of a gun for self-defense purposes remains one of the last effective measures still available to South Africans to defend both themselves and their families from violent criminals.
When firearms are taken off law-abiding citizens, that's a crime against the law-abiding citizen. It's not the law-abiding citizen being a problem.
Good day, goeiedag, Molweni, and welcome to the SA Firearms Summit, proudly hosted by the DA. With South Africa's high crime rate, 58 people are being murdered every day. This is the highest it's been in a decade. Farmers and farm workers face attack and torture in their own homes, while women and children fear to walk the streets. Yet the government wants to disarm law-abiding citizens. The draft Firearms Control Amendment Bill was published on the 21st of May this year. Amongst other things, this draft law proposes to take away the right of firearm owners to legally own a gun for the purpose of self-defense. Following a public outcry, the Minister of Police, Becky Cele, said that South Africans do not have a constitutional right to bear arms, and that the bill he proposes aims to prevent a proliferation of firearms in South Africa. What the minister hasn't explained is what policy purpose will be achieved by disarming lawful, licensed firearm owners. Illegal firearms remain prolific. Between 2014 and 2019, the police lost 4,000 of their own guns. That does not take into account the guns that were confiscated and are meant to be in safekeeping in police storerooms. Those guns, evidence shows, are making their way back to the criminal underground. South Africans have been asked to comment on this proposed new law before the 5th of July. We have brought together a panel of experts, including legal experts, industry bodies, civil society organizations, government representatives, and academia to talk about this bill and the impact it will have not just on gun owners, but people who rely on armed private security to ensure their safety. These services include armed response, neighborhood watch, cash and transit guards, and the security at your local shopping center. But more importantly, you at home, who are your own last line of defense to keep yourself and your family safe. The right to own a firearm for self-defense is vital. It is for this reason that we are having today's summit. Our summit will be divided into segments, each segment allowing our invited participants a few minutes each to state their position, followed by a discussion between the participants and the in-studio panel. We are also joined by a range of participants on Zoom. If you are a registered panelist, please use the Zoom chat function to post your questions, while members of the media can post their questions on the WhatsApp group that has been created for this purpose. For those watching at home, please get in touch with us via social media, Twitter, or Facebook. using the details at the bottom of the screen and the hashtag #StopGunBill. We want to hear what you have to say. With me in studio are Andrew Whitfield, Member of Parliament and the DA Shadow Minister for Police, Helen Ziller, the Chairperson of the DA Federal Council, and Regan Allen, the DA Western Cape Spokesperson for Community Safety. Andrew, very welcome to the summit. Just tell us in essence, what does this bill provide and what are the objections that the Democratic Alliance has to its content?
Thanks very much, Celia. So the DA has made our position on the bill very, very clear from day one. And central to our opposition to the bill is the issue around self-defense. Now, the bill proposes to remove self-defense as a legitimate reason to own a firearm, and the DA believes this is unconscionable against the backdrop of violent crime in South Africa and the high homicide rate. The DA believes that there are other issues with the bill as well, including the impact on the hunting fraternity, private security, and gun collectors who are the cultural custodians of firearms in South Africa. So this is as much about livelihoods as it is about lives, because in the hunting fraternity, for example, rural communities depend on the jobs that come from that particular economy. And so we are fundamentally opposed to it. We believe that it's an ill-considered piece of legislation and is overly draconian in nature, and that there are other options to deal with the problems it purports to try to address.
So if you take away the means of self-defense, we are then reliant completely on the South African police. What is the state of the police at the moment?
Well, the state of the police service in South Africa is best captured by the comments of the National Police Commissioner in Parliament in 2018, when he said that SAPS's mandate, they have an overstretched mandate, which is impossible to fulfill. Now, the constitutional mandate of the South African police service is to secure the lives and property of the citizens of the Republic. And if they cannot achieve that constitutional mandate, if they cannot uphold their end of that social contract, ordinary South Africans are then ultimately left to defend themselves. And basically what the National Police Commissioner was saying is that we are on our own as South Africans when it comes to the safety and security of ourselves and our families.
So that is the political discussion around the bill, but have you spoken to ordinary South Africans and asked them about the realities of self-defense of crime, and what reaction have you received?
Well, I recently travelled across the Eastern Cape to small platteland towns such as Hofmeer, Cradock and Middelburg, amongst others, where there is a genuine concern amongst ordinary citizens who do not have access to private security in rural communities, do not have access to the South African police service in these vast geographical areas, where the only last line of defense for them is their firearm for self-defense purposes. And you know, we've taken our petition out into these communities. We've held a number of public engagements and meetings, and there's a palpable anger at the timing of the bill, and even that such a bill would be brought to the table in a country like South Africa with our high crime rate.
Helen, turning to you, do you think that this bill will do anything to address the actual causes of violent crime where guns are used?
Well, we have to look at the history of this idea that disarming law-abiding citizens will help to control the number of guns in circulation. That is the basic idea. If you reduce the number of guns in circulation, there'll be less violent crime. Because as Kele says, the weapon of choice in murders and violence is usually a gun. So that idea has been tested before. And many thousands of South Africans acting in good faith went and handed in their guns and went and handed in their unlicensed firearms to reduce the number of guns in circulation, in the belief that they would be crushed, melted down, and taken out of circulation. Exactly the opposite happened, as is recorded in this extraordinary book, Give Us More Guns by Mark Shaw. It is really an extraordinary book, and I would argue that every citizen concerned about this issue should actually read it, because it details in extraordinary fine-grained detail exactly how those guns found their way back, not to law-abiding citizens who had unlicensed firearms, but to criminal gangs, particularly in Cape Town. And a greater betrayal of trust I couldn't really imagine. For example, he says here, This book is an exploration of how those guns were removed from the police stocks, the extent of the loss, how they were illegally sold and to whom, as well as how a policy of gun control, whose purpose was to reduce violence in South Africa, fell apart through poor implementation, error, and corruption. So the point is we have historical precedent to go on. And the police service is, if anything, in a far worse state now than it was back then. And even back then, through poor implementation, error, and corruption, the guns that people handed in an amnesty, 2 amnesties, found their way back into the criminal gangs, particularly in Cape Town. And now one also has to ask a question about why the police that were responsible for uncovering that are now being sidelined and pushed out of the police force. And you have to really question the coincidence of those developments at a time like this. This book was an eye-opener to me. And the number of police firearms, 26,000 apparently in 12 years, that have been unaccounted for in the South African police service. Well, where are they? And once the police can account for their own firearms, then they can come and tell law-abiding citizens what to do with theirs.
And that's completely within the control of the state, as it is now, without even talking about expanding those powers.
Without talking about expanding those powers whatsoever, the police can simply account for the 26,000 firearms of their own that are unaccounted for over 12 years, not to mention the 10 million rounds of ammunition that are unaccounted for.
Regan, you are on the Portfolio Committee for Community Safety in the Western Cape, and you recently wrote a piece on Daily Maverick about the guns confiscated by police and that are meant to be in safe keeping. Tell us more about this problem.
In terms of listening to Andrew, I'm happy to be here, and to Helen. In terms of crime and murder, it is nothing to politicize. Innocent people are dying on a daily basis. Mothers are crying. And in this particular opinion piece is around, which is different to what we are discussing, but in what the role that SAPS has in the destruction of those firearms. We have uncovered that biannually, it happens in Pretoria, so any gun found in the Western Cape is stored. It will then be transported biannually.
And these are now guns confiscated from criminals by the police?
So guns confiscated from criminals, taken off our streets to make our streets safer, are then landing up in the storeroom at SAPS. It is then transported to Pretoria twice a year in order to be destroyed. What we have found was in the transportation and in the time frames that there is serious challenges where guns land back in the hands of criminals. We saw 2 months ago in Nova Park, a community ravaged with crime, where law enforcement, which is community safety in the Western Cape, which is extending their mandate in order to add more boots onto the ground, retrieved a firearm from a suspect. And that particular gun was apparently decommissioned, burned, destroyed, like Helen was saying, years ago. So you can imagine, but here this gun is still being used to commit violent crime, to rob people, and potentially murder people. So we've seen how the Firearms Control Act, if the challenges within that act and SAPS and the detectives should do their job, we would be able to reduce crime. We would be able to see a dent in crime if SAPS is able to implement the current laws that's in existence in terms of their mandate, as Andrew explained.
And we'll speak to some civil society organizations and interest groups about whether this act, as it currently stands, the Firearms Control Act, is in fact being implemented. But turning back to the amendment bill that is being proposed, that's been gazetted, what are some of your other concerns from a perspective of community safety in terms of self-defense and firearms?
I think we are going to be on the right side of history. I think we are going to look back 15 years ago when the DA spoke about state capture, when the DA spoke about cadre deployment. Today we are sitting on the right side of history. We've seen those developments. And in opposing this draconian bill, I firmly believe that we are going to be on the right side of history. And even though me personally, I don't own a gun. I don't wish to own a gun. But I would want citizens to have that choice in order to own a gun so that they do have the right to defend themselves. Because we do live in a world where crime is increasing, and crime is increasing to such an extent where people feel extremely scared, even to be in their own homes. So I would definitely urge each and every person listening in order to oppose this bill and to write your comments so that we can be on the right side of history.
Helen, you have been on the right side of history on a few issues in the past. As you understand the Constitution, does the proposal to take away the means of self-defense as contained in this bill, does it accord with what the Constitution says?
Well, everybody has the right to safety. I don't know exactly how far the courts would interpret that, but in any constitutional democracy, the police force or the police service is defined as the arm of the state that can legitimately use violence to defend people. But that arm of the state is so broken. And that arm of the state, by its own admission, is so incapable of undertaking the very basic purpose of a state, which is to keep citizens safe, that when the state fails so profoundly in the pillar, the underlying foundation of the social compact of why we enable a state to create laws, the most basic one is to enable the state to protect citizens. And when that is so profoundly broken, for a state to actively prevent citizens from protecting themselves must surely be a foundational contradiction in the Constitution.
And surely the Constitution can't be a straitjacket which prevents people from doing what needs to be done.
Without being a lawyer, I would certainly say that if the state is incapable of implementing its founding duty to keep its citizens safe, it can't stop citizens from keeping themselves safe.
Thanks very much to our panelists. We will touch on the issue of the constitutionality of the means to self-defense in the next segment. We'll be back straight after this. The right to life is enshrined in the Constitution, but the police minister has stated there is no right in the Constitution to bear arms. Presumably, the minister hopes that this will end the debate. But what if self-defense is the only defense that people have? What does the right to life, as well as bodily integrity and security of person, all written up in the Constitution, mean in a country where people don't have lawful means to protect themselves, especially if the police are incapable of fulfilling their mandate to protect the public? To discuss this, we are joined via Zoom by Laresh Naika, who is affiliated to the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He did his master's thesis on the implications of not allowing citizens to possess firearms for the purposes of self-defense. We're also joined by Damien Enslin, a partner at attorneys Michael Matthews and Associates. Hi, Lareshan. I want to start with you, and thanks so much for joining us on the summit. You wrote your master's thesis on the circumstances, it seems, that are now a reality, where the proposal is on the table to take away a legal means of self-defense. Tell us shortly, what did you find in conclusion of your thesis?
Yes, thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today as well. So if we are looking at Section 2 of the Firearm Control Act, Section 2 of the Firearm Control Act proposes that the bill was enacted to enhance the right to life and bodily integrity. Now, by preventing citizens from owning a firearm for the purposes of self-defense, what the state will be doing is essentially limiting your right to life and bodily integrity. And the way that I analyzed it was by using a Section 36 analysis from our Constitution. So there is a set of criteria that is laid down in Section 36 of the Constitution, which is a limitation clause. And when you use the limitation clause, there is a set of criteria that first needs to be satisfied in order to move forward with limiting a particular right. So the two essential elements that are in focus are the nature of the right and the nature and extent of a limitation. So if we look at what the state is proposing, which is essentially taking away your privilege to possess a firearm for the purposes of self-defense, the first thing they'd do is they'd be infringing on your right to bodily integrity. By not allowing you to possess a firearm for the purposes of self-defense, they will not allow you to be free from violence in certain circumstances. Now, if we turn to our case law and we look at the case of Makwanyane, there was a key portion in the judgment that I'd like to cite.
And that's a death penalty case.
The right to life and dignity are the most important of all human rights and the source of all other personal rights that are in the Bill of Rights. So the right to life in the South African Constitution is essentially unqualified, textually unqualified, which means that the right to life can only be limited in terms of a limitation clause. And given the importance of the right and the total and irremediable negation of it caused by such infringement, and here's the key part, the justification for a limitation has to be exceptionally compelling. The clearest case of a permissible limitation in our law, permitting killing someone to save one's own life or the life of another. So the court held that the law may legitimately permit killing, provided that it is done in self-defense. So what the bill is proposing is that our firearms be taken away. Now you've got to look at what the benefit is from doing that. And to do that, you'll have to look at things from a proportionality aspect. So the proportionality inquiry will require us to assess whether there is proportionality between the harm that is done and the benefit that is sought. So the harm that is done in this particular set of circumstances is repealing Section 13 and 14 of the Firearm Control Act, which allowed you to possess a firearm for self-defense. Now, the rationale by the state is that if they allow you or if they take away your privilege to possess a firearm, it will reduce the amount of violent crime and the proliferation rate of firearms in the country. Now, whilst that could be a possibility, what we also need to consider is that criminals will no longer be able to steal these firearms from citizens and use them. But what needs to be considered is that citizens who have had their firearms taken away, they will no longer be able to get a firearm license issued, and criminals will still remain in possession of their illegal firearms. The difference here is that a criminal will now no longer be able to rob a person of their firearm, but people who were once firearm owners will be left in a position of vulnerability and will not be able to defend themselves. So from criminals stealing your firearms, that's not the only problem that leads to proliferation of firearms in South Africa. What needs to be considered is also the theft of firearms from government departments such as the SAPS and the SANDF, because that's also contributing to the illegal pool of firearms in our country. And with the high proliferation rate in South Africa, what we also need to look at is our national border control and ineffective policing at our ports of entry, because these factors will need to be addressed first before you consider taking away a privilege of possessing a firearm. So from a proportionality aspect, the harm that is caused is not proportionate to the benefit that is sought from the actual bill.
Thank you, Lareshan, and you raise a number of crucial points. I just want to get to Damien. As an attorney in practice, Damien, Lareshan referred to the existing Firearms Control Act and the way that it's not being implemented at the moment. Is the Act, in fact, being implemented as it is? What is the situation?
No, you're absolutely correct. It's not been implemented correctly. As you may know, CFR is in disarray. But in daily practice, I deal with the police stations, with license applications, competence applications. And from the station level all the way to provincial level to national level, it is in disarray. Applications take an inordinate amount of time. I constantly have to field questions and queries from clients who are waiting many months for their competency or license application to be granted. There's a major frustration across all levels, and it seems like the national head office is incapable of remedying or fixing the problem. And it's just in the last year or so has been exacerbated by the two amnesties. But there seems to be no movement on the part of government or the police to fix the problem. Many people within the system talk to me about the lack of resources, the lack of adequate policing. They just do not have the resources, and they're having to deal with a volume of applications and backlogs that are just taking many, many months. Often clients come to us having waited 12 months, 18 months for a competency or license to be granted. And then we try to intervene and try and sort of accelerate the process. And we're also finding that the personnel at CFR, there just seems to be a lack of good personnel there and personnel that are prepared to assist and try and resolve the situation.
Thanks, Damien. So, Andrew, listening to folks outside of politics, it would seem that the main story about the role of government as a regulator of firearms is one of failure. The government can't fulfill under the existing Firearms Control Act its duty as a regulator. So is this amendment bill being brought to distract us from those failures?
Well, I can tell you that I was in Pretoria recently and I went to the Central Firearms Registry, and what I saw there was the stuff of nightmares. It was very clear that there is a blatant failure of basic administrative justice when it comes to the responsibilities of the Central Firearms Registry. And as Damien said, two sort of consecutive amnesties have created an increase in applications, a backlog in the system on top of a backlog, which is insurmountable. I cannot foresee how SAPS, with its current capacity, the state of the building in Pretoria itself, the morale amongst the police officers responsible, how they are ever going to deal with the mountain of applications. And so what it actually seems like is that this draft amendment bill is the lazy way out, if I can put it that way. All of a sudden, our paperwork challenges will go away if we start to remove certain elements of the Act. And as Damien has said, and other people will tell you, the Act in and of itself has not been fully implemented. And there are resource constraints, capacity constraints. Safes of firearm owners are not inspected. There is corruption within the Central Firearms Registry. So SAPS has to get its house in order before it starts coming to knock on the doors of law-abiding, responsible South Africans.
So, Helen, you mentioned before that you're not a lawyer, but hearing the arguments of lawyers in terms of the constitutional implications of taking away a lawful means of self-defense, what is your view on what Lareshan has said in particular?
Well, Lareshan and Damien have made very good points, and judging from their much better specific knowledge, I would think that the balance of argument in a court of law, based on the Constitution, would go to defend the right of citizens to defend themselves. On the proportionality argument that Lareshan used and on the legal argument that Damien used, it seems that on the balance of the right to bodily integrity, to the right to the security of the person and the right to life, if the state is unable to provide that, at their own admission, citizens have to do it themselves. That is why I, as a layperson, would come to that conclusion. It seems pretty obvious to me.
So, Lareshan, I just want to quickly come back to you. In essence, if the minister says, but there's no right in the explicit right in the Constitution to bear arms, as, for example, in other jurisdictions, and so that is not a sufficient constitutional argument.
Yes, well, that will be correct. It is not a right in our Constitution to bear arms. But given the state of the country and the high rate of violent crime, as Ms. Ziller has pointed out, we need to take proactive measures ourselves in order to defend ourselves. So by taking our firearms away and saying that you can no longer have that privilege, they are infringing on your right to life and bodily integrity, because less restrictive means exist, like fixing up the firearm registry, control marking of firearms, mopping up the illegal pool by having more firearm amnesties. So there's lots of less restrictive means that are available.
So, Andrew, we just have a question from Corné van Driel, one of the participants, mentioning the reduction of the budget for visible policing and the constrained resources of the police, and asking how would taking away the Section 13 and 14 right to self-defense be in the best interests of citizens. Do you have comment on that?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a bit of a rhetorical question because he's answered the question for us. I mean, 3.8 billion rand cut from the SAPS budget, primarily from crime investigations and crime detection within the visible policing program. And then, on the other hand, 26 million rand increase to VIP protection, which the Deputy Minister recently in the NCOP tells us is an essential tool of trade for ministers and deputy ministers. Now, presuming that the deputy minister is correct, I would then argue that the right to choose to own a firearm for self-defense against the backdrop of violent crime in South Africa would be an essential tool of trade or tool of survival or defense for many, many millions of South Africans. And so it is unconscionable, again, that SAPS would, or the ANC in this instance, would cut the budget for the South African Police Service and then at the same time, against a backdrop of rising violent crime and increased murders, propose a bill that would limit the right of South Africans to defend themselves.
So, Damien, I just want to get back to you. One of the provisions of the bill is that the minister may declare any specified ammunition as prohibited, as I understand it. Is this acceptable as a competence for ministerial determination? It seems pretty broad to me. What would your comment be on that?
Absolutely. Again, we look about sort of reloading of ammunition as well, and a lot of sport shooters and hunters reload their ammunition. And if the minister suddenly outlawed certain types of hollow points, for instance, ammunition, that would affect, or certain types of bullets in that and ammunition that would affect sport shooters and hunters in general. So it just doesn't make sense at all, and it's really problematic for the entire industry. Long-range precision shooters rely on certain bullets and certain types of ammunition for point-to-point accuracy. I'm a partaker in cowboy action shooting, and we have to download our ammunition. So if the minister starts dabbling in that, it affects entire sport shooting, hunting, and business industries entirely and completely.
Regan, do you want to add something to that?
As I was listening also to Andrew now, if we read the annual performance plan of SAPS on a yearly basis, it will state that visible policing is a key deterrent to crime. And cutting the budget, basically they are saying that they are no longer wanting to deter crime, which is hugely problematic. We've also uncovered recently in the Western Cape that the conviction rate, so we know from 2018, conviction rate for gang-related murders stand at a mere 3%. However, for all crimes for the last financial year here in the Western Cape, it's a new low of 25% for all crimes, which is emboldening, which is making criminals more determined to get away with crime. And obviously then residents feel even more alarmed and afraid.
Thanks very much, Regan. And these are all facts that have to be taken into account when determining the actual meaning of the right to life, as well as a discussion on a means of self-defense in our constitutional dispensation. Thanks to our panelists. We'll be back right after this. There's been a massive outcry by South African citizens, civil society organizations, as well as the firearms industry, who all oppose the amendments to the Firearms Control Bill. It would seem that the government did not speak to any of the interested parties before gazetting the bill, and so people are upset and angry. The bill will have devastating effects on multiple industries, including sport and hunting, as well as training and security. To unpack this and more, we are joined on Zoom by Lynette Oxley, founding member of Girls on Fire, an initiative of Gun Owners South Africa. Paul Oxley, the chairman of Gun Owners South Africa, Dries van Coller, who is the CEO of the Professional Hunters Association of SA, and Nikki Pretorius, owner of the International Firearm Training Academy. And in studio, we are joined by Angus McKenzie, DA Councillor for Bonteheuwel in Cape Town. Welcome to our next round of panelists. Angus, I want to start with you. You represent Bonteheuwel, a community that is particularly affected by gang violence and gun violence. From what you understand from this bill and what you've heard, do you think that taking away a lawful means of self-defense will solve the problem that you have in a community such as Bonteheuwel?
Look, I think up front, absolutely not. The reality is that both the Minister of Police, as well as an individual called Crispin Prinsloo, a colonel in the South African Police Services, have so much blood on their hands. The overwhelming amount of people that are killed in this country on a daily basis, I think it's about 58 people a day are murdered in this country. An overwhelming amount of those people come from the Cape Flats. And on the Cape Flats, Chris Prinsloo, under the direction of a Minister of Police that has brought in the sort of draconian legislation that we're having to deal with here, has caused that firearms that are supposed to be destroyed, firearms that are meant to be kept safe, firearms that are supposed to be under lock and key effectively, has filtered into gangsters' hands consistently. The government has in fact failed in its inability not just to secure the most secure right of people, which is to keep them safe, but so that the South African Police Services as a whole has failed our communities on a consistent basis. There's no trust relationship that exists between people and the South African Police Services. And this is evidently due to the fact that gangsters have assumed total control. And so while we speak about the constitutionality of the bill and while we speak about the legal aspects of the bill, it's important to understand what is actually happening on the ground and how people, real residents on a daily basis, are being affected by the failure of the South African Police Services. So there's no need to bring in a new bill that takes away the right of an individual to have the right to protect himself. What you really need to do is you need to be able to take the current legislation that exists, implement it properly, and you'll see that you'll have a reduction of crime. You'll see that cases will start going through our DNA system, which is another failure of SAPS, and you'll see that illegal firearms won't find their ways into communities. But because SAPS has failed, because there's that complete breakdown in services that should be rendered to citizens of this country, you're seeing this number of murders increase on a daily basis, gangsters continually assuming that they control residents and communities, and illegal firearms driving that trade. And effectively, illegal firearms and drugs go hand in hand, which is causing the terror that many of our residents have to live in on a daily basis.
So the Minister of Police has to answer a little bit more than just defending his new proposal. He has to explain what has happened to those guns in police custodianship.
Absolutely. Many of the firearms that we are confiscating, that we are finding on gangsters, that gangsters are using to shoot other gangsters with, many of these firearms are what they call these Z88 firearms, which is South African Police Service issued firearms. Where did these firearms come from? Were they stolen from SAPS? Did SAPS pass them on to gangsters through Colonel Prinsloo, for an example, who has been prosecuted for it? But is Colonel Prinsloo just one of the many corrupt SAPS officials that is causing this mayhem to take place?
Yeah. Lynette, turning to you, few people would associate the fight to protect the means of self-defense with the fight against gender-based violence, but your organization is in the forefront of that. How important is it? How important is the right to self-defense and the training with the proper use of weapons to this fight against gender-based violence?
It's absolutely important. President Ramaphosa was talking about the second wave of GBV. Girls on Fire believes the proposed changes that he's suggesting in the Firearms Control Act will be a significant contributor, if not the direct cause, of the second pandemic of gender-based violence. If you have a look at the crime statistics in South Africa, as women, we are the most vulnerable in this regard, and we carry the added burden of being responsible for the security of our children. And suddenly we are totally defenseless in terms of what is happening if we can't defend ourselves. If you look at Girls on Fire, we believe responsible firearm ownership provides a woman with an empowering mindset. It prepares us, we believe that we want to emotionally, mentally, and even physically train women not to be victims. And providing them by the means to legally defend themselves and their children and their families. And the only way to do so is with a legally owned firearm.
Thanks very much, Lynette. Now turning to Dries van Koller, from the perspective of professional hunters. Dries, presumably you've read this proposed new law. What impact will the bill have on the economy and jobs in the sector that you represent?
Well, firstly, I think our focus this morning has been pretty much on the self-defense side. One of the things that we've got to take into account that the hunting formal and informal sectors contribute significantly to our country. The professional hunting side contributes in excess of 3 billion rand per annum on direct costs, and the informal market probably in the region of about 12 billion. Now, if we just take that, most of that is occurring in rural economies where no normal tourist would go. The only catalyst and incentive that people have and earn a living is from game farms and the products thereof. Game farmers don't have the ability just to take the animals to an abattoir to have them slaughtered. They have to have them done through a process of hunting. There is a lot that goes with this. The reloading aspect, the aspects around just professional hunters having to redo competency. We've already got a competency certificate. We have our professional hunter's license, which is issued by government. Yet now we get a further law imposed on us to go for recompetency, become a professional hunter. The impact is dire. How are these local communities going to be stimulated? How are they going to grow if their only livelihood is coming from the hunting tourist that comes to these areas? If we just look at all the new entrants into market, we are trying to talk about transformation and empowerment and the land restoration. Is how do these new entrants that receive these properties, how will they go about getting equipment to do their daily functions with all these restrictions in place? It's just ludicrous.
Dries, we've spoken about the implementation of the current Firearms Control Act. And we've sought comment from outside participants. What is your experience of how this act is being administered and implemented by government as it is, without even considering amendments to the bill, to the act as it stands?
I think if I can just join with what was previously, I think the act as it stands, if it was ever implemented correctly, might have made a difference. But to say the least, that is pathetic. We have got people that are waiting for firearms in excess of 2 years. How do you perform your daily functions if you cannot even get the tools to do your job? You have been found competent by the police. You've been found competent by the trainers. You've been found competent by the education system that you've gone through, but yet you still have to go through the whole process to obtain your firearm. The restrictions are just so astronomical at the end of the day. It just makes it impossible to perform function. If anybody had to lose their income, they'd make a big uproar. How do we tell our people, our staff, that we can't perform to full capacity because of the restrictions in place? Our current gun laws are over the top, to say the least. We have been seen over and over again. It's not our hunting rifles that are causing problems. It's the military rifles that are causing a lot of the issues, and handguns. Now, our farmers' safety is also at stake here. Who looks after them? The police cannot respond fast enough to get to these remote areas, and yet they want to implement laws that restrict you to look after yourself. We know that people up in the rural areas, like in Tolva, in the far north, the nearest police station is maybe 300 kilometers away. How are you going to handle these situations? It just doesn't make sense.
Thanks, Dries. And before we get to Nikki, Andrew, I've got a question from journalist Jan de Lange from Rapport that I'm going to give to you to answer. And Jan asks, why is the annual statistics on justifiable homicide by civilians in South Africa not available? Why did opposition parties up to now never asked questions and exerted pressure on authorities to disclose these numbers? Doesn't this illustrate that the rights of firearm owners was in fact low priority for opposition parties?
Well, it's a great question. The question hasn't been asked to my knowledge. I think it's an excellent question. You'll see in a lot of the analysis that's been done in the media by researchers, by journalists, the data that is available around justifiable homicide is just not there. And so it's a question we'll certainly be asking. But I don't believe that it's been a low priority issue. In fact, since I've been a member of Parliament in this 6th Parliament, we have raised repeated issues around the firearm amnesty, the rights of firearm owners, the inability of SAPS to safeguard firearms. This is an interesting element that is certainly worth exploring to get that data if SAPS actually keeps that data.
And Andrew, I think probably the other part of the issue is that the rights to bear arms of firearm owners to have guns for the purpose of self-defense has never before been this directly under attack. So, I mean, those rights have been legislated and regulated over the years, but it's never been to this point where there's a gazetted proposal to take away that right completely.
Sure, it has always been lurking in the background. There's always been a fear that this day would come. It certainly was an issue that was debated and raised in 2015 at the Firearm Summit that was hosted by the Portfolio Committee on Police at the time, and there was a leaked version of this bill which actually hasn't really changed since it was leaked 5 years ago. And so we believe that yes, this is the first time it's ever been formally gazetted for public comment. Our public comment will certainly seek to solicit information that we don't currently have, and we will be asking the Minister more pointed questions around this particular issue. But we've asked a whole range of other questions on the issue of firearm ownership, and we'll keep asking those questions. We're not going to be able to answer everybody's questions all the time, and we're certainly willing to pursue that line of questioning going forward.
Thanks, Andrew. Nikki, turning to you, we've spoken about the existing Firearms Control Act. My question is, in your view, is this act properly regulating the training aspect of owning firearms sufficiently? And if there are gaps in the act as it stands, what are those gaps? How do we fill them?
Thank you. Morning, everybody. So let me quickly tell you what RTA does. We're a lead service provider, which means that we create training material and training programs that support the Firearms Control Act 60 of 2000, specifically Chapter 5, Section 9, Q, R, and S of the Act. What this means is that when a person is wanting to license a firearm for self-defense, they need to do Section 9 Q of the Act. This includes the knowledge of the Act section. It's a unit standard, so it's unit standard based. It's recognized by the quality assurer, etc. And once you've done Section Q, which then focuses on possession and licensing of a firearm, etc., you then move on to the unit standards that cover handling and using the firearms, which cover safety, the law pertaining to when you may and may not use your firearm for self-defense, etc. We're very highly quality assured in our industry, both by our quality assurer and the SAPS. The SAPS recognizes our training program because without our training program, they wouldn't be able to implement parts of the Firearms Control Act. People wouldn't be able to license firearms or apply for competency. So it's very important to note that we're highly regulated. The Act as it stands today and the implementation of the Act from a training point of view is very comprehensive. It isn't perfect. There are a lot of things that can be changed, but there are minor things. And to throw out an entire Act or to rewrite an entire Act that has years of learnings behind it. When the Arms and Ammunition Act, the 1969 Arms and Ammunition Act was replaced by the Firearms Control Act 60 of 2000, there was massive consultation in our industry with the SAPS, with the standards generating body at the time. Mistakes were made, lessons were learned, and it took them a long time before they actually implemented the current Act as we know it. So to throw it out now would be very short-sighted. Some things off the top of my head that could absolutely be improved are we see different categories of firearm owners in our industry, those that participate in sport shooting and hunting associations, etc. Those that do their firearm competency, they license a firearm and then go ahead and do additional non-accredited training to build their skills. And then there's those that license a firearm for self-defense, pop it in the safe, and only retrieve it again once it's needed or required or when they have to redo their competencies. that's the firearm owner we believe that needs the additional training. So a refresher shoot after the 5 years of the firearm being in the safe. So that's one of the amendments we would possibly be looking at if we had any sway. The other one pertains to the security industry. As it stands today, which pertains to Section Q9S of the Act, as it stands today, a security officer's competency card looks identical to the competency certificate or card of a person who's licensed a firearm for self-defense. So it makes it very difficult for security industry to be able to differentiate a private citizen's competency certificate versus a security officer's certificate. So off the top of my head, and two quick ones, because I know that we're limited for time, but those would be the two amendments that we would like to see. Again, to throw out the entire act, very, very short-sighted. It'll set us back at least 2 decades in terms of what we managed to achieve with the current act.
So, Paul Oxley, I want to turn to you. There seems to be things short of taking away the means of lawful means of self-defense to improve whatever is wrong with the regulation of firearms in South Africa. And as an industry body, has government ever spoken to you about the problems in the current act and how they might be solved?
Okay. Sorry, to preface my remarks. So we were asked to prepare certain inputs on certain subjects for this webinar. I see that's all changed now. So I'm going to have to try and weave a little bit of what I need to say into this insert. Thanks very much for the invite to start. I also need to preface my remarks by saying that GOSA is an organization of South Africans, for all South Africans. We are participating in this Democratic Alliance organized summit fully, and we thank you very much for the opportunity. We're also talking to parties across the board, from AfriForum through to Transvaal Landbou, through to the taxi associations, through to MKMVA and the self-defense units, who are absolutely incensed by this. The taxi associations tell us that 99% of their drivers have legally licensed firearms for their own self-protection. They're taking all the cash money. They'll be hugely influenced by this whole thing. But then I also need to make the point at the same time that GOSA plays no favorites. GOSA talks to everybody. GOSA must talk to everybody. That's our role. Our role is we're a single issue campaign. We're about the rights of South Africans to own firearms. And perhaps that leads me into what I should actually be talking about, which is the right to own firearms, the right to defend ourselves, the right to defend our life with the most effective means to hand. And that's perhaps, that I think perhaps lies at the heart of this. We're moving towards, we seem to be moving towards with this bill, a society that has no real, that doesn't pay attention to the individuals and to our rights to live a free life in a democratically, constitutional democracy, in a republic. We seem to be trying to move towards a positive law situation where you have no rights unless the government confers those rights on you, or you have no privileges unless the government confers those privileges on you. And much has been made by Minister Telle and by the whole anti-gun crowd of the remarks in the Constitutional Court a couple of years ago, the unfortunate remarks, the ill-considered remarks in the Constitutional Court, which were completely obiter. They're an opinion. I mean, everyone has an opinion. I think Land Rovers are better than Land Cruisers. It's an opinion. I may be wrong, but it's my opinion. I can have that. Fortunately, the remarks were made. The remarks weren't a judgment. The remarks were simply an opinion, as I said. In any case, so we go back to the whole issue of firearm ownership. Is it a right or is it a privilege? And we would strongly state that it's an implicit right. So all law and all rights are born of our natural rights, our natural right to life, to protect that life. That's implicit. Nobody argues with the fact that you're allowed to protect your life. However, what's also implicit in the right to defend your life or to protect your life is the right to the most effective means of doing so. And that's where various things come to mind. We protect our properties by fences or walls, by gates, by alarm systems, by armed response. All of this is taken for granted. It's implicit in the right to defend your property and your life. Okay, so now we let's go to other things. Do you require permission for the government to take up martial arts? Do you require permission from government to carry a pepper spray with you, or a panic button? Because that's part of defending your life. So we don't even imagine that government has the right to regulate those things. Why do we imagine that government has the right to regulate our access to firearms? They don't have that right. It's never been within their purview. It's a privilege that we've granted to them, not that they're granting to us. We need to retake that. We need to re-own our democracy. We, the people, need to tell government how they should be governing us. They govern at our pleasure. We need to remind them of this. This is a far larger thing than just firearm ownership. This impacts on every other aspect of our lives. We need to retake control of our democracy. This is our democracy. It doesn't belong to the government.
Thanks, Paul. And of course, all of the panelists must feel free to jump in and give their contributions as they see it, as they are important. So the one important point, Helen, that Paul made here is that of the nature of rights. Rights aren't entitlements that are granted by governments. They arise from something deeper, even more deeper and profound than written provisions in a constitution. What would your comment be
Yes,
on
my
that?
comment is that is a very profound point. Rights are not things that you can foist on people, but they are things you cannot take away from people. And we need to really understand that very fundamentally across the board in South Africa. What a constitutional democracy means is that people have inherent rights that the government may not take away, and that the government is accountable to the people. That is very different from traditional societies where rights are privileges conferred on you by whoever's in charge.
That's authoritarianism.
Correct. And the big break that we made from the past was the inherent rights spelled out in our Constitution that are ours, that are not by grace and favour of whoever happens to be in power, but that they are ours and that have to be protected by the state. Now, previously, you and I had a bit of a discussion about whether the Constitutional Court would weigh it up in the same way as Lareshan and Damien weighed it up, and in the same way as Paul is now weighing it up. But the right to life, the right to bodily integrity and security of the person are not favours, they are inherent rights, and the implicit rights that flow from that is what Paul is raising. So if the state can't fulfill its fundamental duty of protecting those rights, then isn't it implicit that individuals have the right to protect those rights? Because a right is something that cannot be taken away from you. And that definition of a right is what I really like, because many implicit rights flow from that understanding.
So Paul referred to the arbiter comment made by the Constitutional Court in a different case, and what arbiter basically means is that the court is not speaking on the facts before them. They're making a by-the-way comment in relation to the matter in general. So arbiter remarks aren't binding precedent. But Lareshan mentioned the death penalty case, Makwanyane, and the principles that arise from the right to life. So it is clearly not as simple as saying, well, the Constitutional Court has already made this by-the-way comment and the matter is decided. Clearly, this matter still needs to be developed constitutionally, and there are much broader arguments than just saying, well, we don't have an explicit right to bear arms.
Well, if the Constitutional Court has specifically said that everybody has the right to life and bodily integrity and safety of the person, And if the state has conceded that it doesn't have the capacity to fulfill its side of the social compact to defend that right, then the courts must explain to us how that right is to be protected. And no obiter remark can fulfill that. As you say, an obiter is like an off-the-cuff, by-the-way remark that a court makes. It's not a precedent-setting part of a judgment. But I think it is critical that in South Africa, where the basic social compact that the state exists and citizens can expect the state to do certain things, the most fundamental of which is to protect their bodily integrity, safety and security. If they can't do that, there are implications if citizens are not to have their rights arbitrarily taken away. And that is the issue.
Right. Celia's, I want to follow on to what Helen is saying as well. A few nights ago, I got a call from a resident whose life was being threatened. So she had someone throwing her windows in, wanting to force himself into her property. By the time she'd called me, she'd called SAPS probably about 3 or 4 or 5 times already to come and protect her. SAPS never came.
And of course, being a local government councillor, you have got no power.
I've got no power.
I've got no power
over South African police. So what is this lady left to do? Who then protects this resident, this citizen? If the state is unable to protect her, she should never find herself in a position where the right to protect herself is taken away from her when the system that should be and has constitutionally been put in place to protect her has failed her. And I think critically that is probably the essence of this discussion. It's you cannot take away the right of someone to protect themselves if you have failed in your duty to protect them, supposedly.
Yes. So I just want to turn to some of the questions by delegates raised on the Zoom platform. Andrew, this one is for you again, from Ian Cameron. Do you know how many firearms have been lost by police over the last 15 years? I think it's something that we discussed before. A few years ago, I worked with cops in the Eastern Cape, says Ian, and came across a report that almost 50% of cops weren't compliant carrying guns, but they were doing exactly that.
Well, it's a great question, and based on the available data, you can go online, you can go and have a look at it. You can read Mark Shaw's book. You can see that it's about 30. I would imagine in the region of 30,000 firearms in the last 15 years, and that's just South African Police Service firearms stolen from the South African Police Service, and that's an extraordinary amount of firearms. As a percentage of the total SAPS firearms, it's incredibly high. So if you look at it in percentage terms, if there are 3 million, for example, or 2.5 million legally licensed firearm owners in South Africa, and thousands are stolen from them every year, the ratios are completely imbalanced. The total number of firearms stolen from SAPS is incredibly high. And then what we still don't know is how many of those are civilian firearms kept in the state's custodianship. And so it's an incredibly worrying issue. But, Ian talks about going into the Eastern Cape. Well, in Tofenvaba, there is a police station in a rural community, which is, an absolutely essential service for communities in those rural parts of the eastern part of the Eastern Cape, where these violent criminals came in, locked the police officers up in a jail cell and stole as many firearms as they could get their hands on, including, automatic and semi-automatic rifles, all sorts of weapons of all descriptions, and potentially even civilian firearms. So my point in this whole debate is, of course we want to see less illegal firearms on the streets. Of course we want to see less murders by firearm, but we've got to come up with the right solution. And this remains a lazy solution. It's the easy way out, to criminalize law-abiding, responsible South Africans rather than going after the criminals who are the ones committing the crime. The guns are not committing the crime. It is the criminals who are committing the crimes. And we need to shift SAPS's focus back to the criminals.
I want to give our Zoom panelists an opportunity to comment on this. Paul, have you got anything to say about Ian's point? Paul,
he's unmute himself.
Just if you unmute yourself.
Sorry, you actually muted me.
Anyway, right.
I'm used to that. I've been married for a long, long time. Anyway, so absolutely. Look, and it hasn't escaped our attention that this entire bill might just be an attempt from SAPS side to throw some dust in the air, to try to eye blind us to the fact that the National Crime Prevention Strategy has collapsed, in the words of the National Commissioner. They've become an all-service agency. They cannot fulfill their constitutional mandate. They've admitted this 2 years ago in Parliament. With the proper budget, now they've cut their budget by 10%. The public policing budget by 10%. Where the hell are they going to find the people to man the desks, to man the patrol cars? Quite simply, they aren't. They've just tossed their hands in the air and said, well, we can't do it, so therefore it's not something we have to do. You're on your own, guys. Sort it out. But they're taking away they're trying to, so they've chucked this in the air to try to eye blind us to all of their problems, to their constitutional problems. This is a constitutional problem for the police. The police have failed. They have failed in their mandate. Apart from everything else they've failed at, one of the things, of course, that they have failed at is in administering the Firearms Control Act. They've always failed at. This was the reason in 2009 that Judge Prinsloo gave the green card judgment. Was because the police had failed in their ability to process the new license applications. The backlog at that stage was 950,000 odd. The backlog hasn't got any better. Every time the police do anything, the backlog slips further behind. So in order to, as one of the panelists earlier said, this is a quick fix for them. Let's just ban everything, and then then maybe we'll get rid of some of the paperwork. Unfortunately, if you view this in the same light as the fact that they've effectively given up the fight against crime, remember that according to the Peelian principles, modern policing is based on the work of Sir Robert Peel in the Metropolitan Police in London, and one of the principles of Peelian policing is that the success in the fight against crime is not the number of people that you can manage to arrest. It's the absence of crime. So by any measure, the South African Police Service has always bungled this. They've never been able to get to grips with real crime. So they're turning to the easy solution. Let's take the attention off us by picking on the people who are not the problem. One of the guys down the block from me may be a rapist. So let's castrate everybody else on the block. It's clumsy. It's unfortunately typical of the present incumbent in the office of the ministry. It's just not a very smart move at all. And what we have on our side at the moment on this is it's unlocked outrage. And outrage is exactly the right word for this. What we are seeing from the community across the board. I participate in a lot of online interviews, a lot of live radio shows, and the callers are calling in from the entire community, and the callers are livid. The callers are absolutely astounded that the police would try this, that the police ministry would try this. It's bizarre, it's unacceptable, but it gives us an opportunity, I believe, as South Africans, to retake control of a huge and critical part of our democracy.
Paul, I want to get to Lynette, who has something to say on this issue as well. Lynette?
Yes, I actually want to talk about 2 points. The first one is the gentleman on the panel basically talked about the lady being alone and calling the police. When an attack happens on a woman, you are alone. You're not going to have the police or your security guards or people, your armed response there. The criminal chooses the time and the place of the attack. They choose the time when you are not, nobody else can defend yourself. So our point is the only way you as a woman can defend yourself and your family is by being legally armed and being trained to be able to defend yourself. My second point is, in terms of the Act that I just want to bring up, is that Girls on Fire rejects the whole Act in its entirety. It's not just the self-defense section that bothers us. A lot of us are sport shooters. A lot of us are hunters. We have businesses. I own a gun shop as well. So my whole life will actually be influenced by the changes in the Firearms Control Act. The big thing is in its entirety, it needs to be scrapped. That's really important.
Thanks, Lynette. That's actually quite a powerful statement, is that attacks on women in particular happen on the terms of the criminal. And government has been unable to change that situation. Andrew, have you got any comment on that, especially on the issue of GBV?
Well, criminals seem to be given increasing license to commit crime against declining numbers of police officers, certainly quality, honest, professional police officers, of which there are many. But unfortunately, the tide is turning inside the South African Police Service. We see more and more cases of corruption, more and more problematic police officers who are not doing their jobs properly, who are not trained to do their jobs properly. And the criminals, as Lynette said, they're the ones in control. They have the power to determine when they're going to strike, because they know that it's going to take SAPS, 20 minutes if you're lucky, if they ever come to respond to a call. It could take hours, it could take days. And in certain parts of the country, it does, because there aren't enough vehicles, there aren't enough police officers, and now they're going to be less and less police officers. And what the cut to the visible policing budget actually means is that we are going to see a 3.8 billion rand cut in personnel. That's really what it means. So instead of putting boots on the ground, SAPS is taking boots off the ground, which is why I'm so excited about what the Western Cape government and the City of Cape Town are doing within their very limited mandate, because again, we can't stress this point enough, the South African Police Service is a national competency. It is not the competency of the local and provincial government, but within their limited mandate, they are putting boots on the ground. And so we're looking at, I think it's 1,000 law enforcement officers that are going to be deployed across the City of Cape Town to ensure that we keep, visible policing on the ground. And SAPS
and I suppose that's an important point, is to keep focused on the actual causes of crime and how to fight it. Not just Bheki Cele's bill and his ideas, but to keep the focus on the failure of government, including what you've pointed out with the DNA database, which is crucial. The evidence collected by police is crucial to securing conviction of especially rapists. And that DNA database is in a terrible state. But yet we're talking about Bheki Cele's plans to disarm. Angus, you
see, I think, Celias, we've seen a tangible difference in communities where we've been able to employ and deploy the law enforcement teams. We've seen a huge reduction in the murder rates in these communities, notwithstanding that the biggest challenge that you sit with when it comes to crime and gang-related crime is getting as much positive convictions out of the arrest that you get out of it. So we currently sit, and I think Regan spoke about it earlier, on a 3% conviction rate. So for every 10 gangsters that are arrested by a law enforcement officer, 3 of them are going through the system, and 7 of them are walking free within 12 hours, consistently terrorizing communities with illegal firearms that they've siphoned off wherever they've got it. And it's quite easy to get an illegal firearm, apparently. But the fact of the matter is, the more boots on the ground you get, the more you create an environment within communities where communities start feeling safe. And as communities start feeling safe, their relationship with law enforcement changes. Because currently the relationship's completely broken. They don't trust law enforcement. They don't trust the South African Police Services at all. And so when you start getting the relationship right between community and law enforcement, and you have consistent visibility, you suppress gang violence. And in suppressing gang violence, you find that gangsters know that if they are to do a criminal act in shooting in the next hour, they know they actually can't do it because around the corner there's a visible police officer, there's a visible law enforcement officer around the corner. So the more boots on the ground you get, the more you are able to suppress it. in notwithstanding the fact that we should actually be putting these buggers behind bars. But we can't put them behind bars because our SAPS system has completely collapsed. Our detective system has collapsed. I mean, we're dealing with in one police station in Cape Town, which I'm aware of, one detective is having to go through about 200 to 250 case dockets of gang-related crime. It's literally impossible for him to get through this situation.
They get their guns from Pretoria.
Exactly.
Ellen, I need to close off the segment with a question from Nicholas Wood-Smith from the Rational Standard, which I think you are best placed to answer. Is this move, the bill, to functionally ban guns conveniently used to enable other abhorrent legislation? Disarmament by regimes usually precede something worse. With expropriation without compensation on the horizon, this amendment becomes even more dire. What is your view?
You know, over the years, I've learned to expect anything from the ANC. Anything. Nothing shocks me anymore. And no theory seems too far-fetched for me anymore. So I have read the theory that this huge disarmament of law-abiding citizens is a precursor to enforced expropriation without compensation or enforced state custodianship of land. And even 5 years ago, I would have poo-pooed it as a conspiracy theory. But now literally anything is possible. Cyril Ramaphosa says something one day, and he is contradicted the next week by his own representatives in Parliament. It seems to me that Julius Malema is now calling the shots and meeting with the ANC's top six on the question of custodianship of the state of all land without any compensation. Those are the demands that Julius Malema is making. And the top six seem, in terms of the newspaper reports that I've read, to be entertaining a discussion on that. Now, you know, no conspiracy theories anymore go too far for me because I have seen too many of them become true. When we started talking about cadre deployment being the root of the corrupt and criminal state back in 2009, when the whole cadre deployment thing started, people laughed us out of court. We said it's going to become the root of the criminal, the corrupt, criminal, and failed state. Everybody said this is absurd. You're just a bunch of racists trying to cover up your racism by saying that you don't want the advancement of black people. We said then this has got nothing to do with the advancement of any people at all, let alone with fixing the disadvantage caused by past oppressive and racist policies. This has everything to do with centralizing all power in a few hands, everything to do with disempowering people, everything to do with implementing a centralized regime that wants to control you and take away your rights. And that's how it's unfolded. I hate to say that we were right. I wish we hadn't been. I wish our democracy had succeeded. So when people come up with arguments like the Rational Standard has, I don't dismiss it because I know anything's possible.
Thanks very much to our panelists. That is all we have time for on this particular part of the summit. We will be back right after this. As you might have seen in the media, the DA invited the Police Minister Bheki Cele to the summit. We wanted him and his department to make the case for the proposed Firearms Control Amendment Bill. We wanted a frank, open-ended conversation with the minister and for him to listen to the concerns of the industry, civil society and ordinary South Africans. But instead, Minister Cele did not respond to our offer. This moment would have been his chance to address concerned citizens and to answer the questions that have arisen here today. To discuss this, we are joined in studio by John Steenhuisen, the DA federal leader. And joining us on Zoom is JP Smith, City of Cape Town Mayoral Committee member for Safety and Security. Welcome to our panelists. John, I'm going to begin with you. Why should folks who don't own guns or own a gun for the purpose of self-defense be worried about the contents of this draft bill?
Sure. Before I answer that, I just want to say how great it is to be here and how great it is to be with all the panelists at home. And thank you very much for everybody's participation in this very important summit. Well, first of all, we start off from the underlying philosophical underpinning of why this is important. And it all comes down to individual choice. We're the party that believes that you should have the right to make choices for yourself as an individual, and that nobody should be making those decisions for you. So there are people in South Africa who don't want to own a firearm. That is their right, and we would support it. There's people in South Africa who would like to own a firearm, and equally we must support that right of individual choice to own a firearm for self-defense or for any of the other purposes that we've learnt about today. I think it's hugely problematic, and I think there's a bigger issue here at play that has started to emerge in this last segment, that there's actually a fundamental assault on all the rights of South Africans. And everywhere you look, if you go through Chapter 2 of the Constitution, nearly every single one of the rights set out there is under assault by a government who's absolutely intent on controlling and manipulating every aspect of life. Healthcare, under threat by the NHI. If we have NHI, it means life estimeni for everybody. The right to own property, under threat. The right to ply your own trade, to be able to have economic activity, has been hugely curtailed by the government over the course of this last year. What you have is a government that's sitting like Marie Antoinette, making these decrees and rules for everybody else without having to bear the consequences. And I think the other important point that came out today was one that Andrew and others have made. Bekele doesn't move without a phalanx of bodyguards around him. Ministers travel around in blue light convoys. It is therefore little reason to misunderstand why they don't have a clue about what is really happening on the ground across South Africa, where ordinary citizens are under assault every single day because they don't experience it. Department of Public Works and the South African Police Service provide security at their private homes, at their official residences. They've got round-the-clock bodyguards that protect them and keep them and their families safe. They've got drivers. Wherever they move, they are cosseted by this blue brigade of police officers. This is a right that no other South African has. And they are quite happy to, at the stroke of a pen, throw ordinary citizens to the wolves as long as they're all right. And I think the huge example of this is how they've now voted themselves this new increase in VIP protection, while ordinary citizens now are about to be deprived of their very last line of defense that they have against violent and dangerous criminals. We don't live in Norway or one of the Nordic countries. This is South Africa. We're one of the highest crime rates in the world. We're one of the highest violent crime rates in the world. So South African citizens need to protect themselves in the face of a government that has completely failed to keep them and their families safe.
And that's the paradox, as at the center of this, as government insists on taking away more of the freedoms of ordinary people and increasing reliance on government, at the same time, government's capacity to protect us, to provide basic services, diminishes. So indeed, this wouldn't be a debate necessarily we would have if we were living in Europe with a pristine and capable state.
Well, of course, you have a capable state that's able to deliver services. You have policing that actually catches criminals. You've got a criminal justice system that has a conviction rate on violent crime that's nowhere near the low as the 10% as we have in South Africa. So crime pays in South Africa for many, many criminals. This is a completely different paradigm that we're living here. And that is why every time the state steps in and tries to take control of something, it ends up in an unmitigated disaster. It's why we have an airline that doesn't fly. It's why we've got an electricity generator that can't generate electricity. It's why we've got an arms manufacturer that can't manufacture arms. Everywhere you look where the state gets involved and tries to take control and put its nose where it shouldn't, it ends up an unmitigated disaster. This is going to be the same.
JP Smith, you are a member of the Mayoral Committee for Community Safety in Cape Town, an administration controlled by the DA. You have quite some experience of crime and criminals and gangs in your city, and gun violence in particular. You've seen what's been gazetted in the bill. What is your view? Does this bill address the actual cause of crime, especially gun-related crime?
I think that answer is very self-evident to anybody who spends any time working in any kind of community safety capacity in the Cape Flats. I just want to tie on with what John said at the end there. I hope that you will remind all these cabinet ministers that none of them who vote for this legislation must be allowed to move around with their phalanx of VIP protection, as the national minister loves to sport his very large contingent of armed members wherever he goes, when it is their intention to disarm the general public. And I think, if every day that myself and our mayor and our councillors go to public meetings and our provincial colleagues, they are confronted by these crime stats. We have an increasingly lawless environment with a criminal justice system that shows it's not able to turn this tide. The previous set of crime statistics showed that 21,325 murders happened in our country between April 2019 and March 2020. Those are shocking figures. The World Health Organization lists us as 10th out of 183 countries with a murder rate of 35.8, and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime says that we're 5th out of 93 countries in 2018 with a murder rate of 36.4. Those are extremely high levels of crime, and we all know about the situation with high levels of gender-based violence and all other violent contact crime. And I mean, these factors are contributed to by numerous contributors. The low level of policing that has been touched on is certainly a major one. We have most of our police stations in Cape Town are well below half of what the national average appears to be, and a little bit better than a third of the resources by international best practices. That's a really big crisis. I had the misfortune of speaking to a senior police officer last week at an event who said to me with Youth Day that his policing to public ratio now is that he has one officer for every 1,800 members of the public. And this is absolutely disastrous to have gotten to a situation like that, and combine that with a massive lack of detectives, huge overload of those detectives, as was published by our provincial government, I think about a year and a half ago. They published some figures that was quoted by Angus earlier. The under-resourcing of our forensic labs and a serious lack of modernization, even though the National Development Plan was adopted in 2012 already. Combine those factors and you have a really disastrous situation. Shamila Batoyi says that, and I want to emphasize the conviction issue, that in an interview, that the failure of policing in South Africa is actually a failure of achieving conviction. It's something that I personally believe lies at the heart of our gang violence problem. Remember that as much as 24% of our murders in the city are gang-related, and those gangsters have long and prosperous careers, or longer than they should be, because of that paltry conviction rate of 2 or 3% that's been quoted earlier. You can only interdict that through effective prosecutions. So in that context, the city has done everything that we can. It's not many or any levers left for us to pull. We've done everything you can to improve that public safety. We've systematically improved our traffic law enforcement metro police. We've used smarter technologies like CCTV, gunfire detection, computer-aided dispatch. We've increased the partnership with communities, with city improvement districts. We've rolled out rent-a-cop programs that has put hundreds of extra boots on the ground. We have about over 500 law enforcement auxiliary officers, the only city in South Africa that has a police reserve service. We have made a massive investment with neighborhood watches, with around 30,000 or almost 30,000 accredited neighborhood watches members across the city, something that was started when Helen was mayor of the city. And we've taken over a lot of policing functions, whether it be metal theft, liquor enforcement, marine enforcement, rail enforcement, gang enforcement. On the gang side alone, which is a really big issue always for us in Cape Town, we have our gang and drug task team, the K9 unit. We manage informants. We do watching briefs over our cases to see where they're going. We experimented with a stabilization unit that became the neighborhood safety team in Delft, and then ultimately became the Law Enforcement Advancement Program, or LEAP, in conjunction with the provincial government. So there's not a great deal more that we can do from our side to bolster the help of national government. But if we're pouring water in the one side of the bucket and Minister Clele and his colleagues are scooping it out the other side, then we sit with this crisis. And against that backdrop, you cannot then tell the public, sorry, we're going to take from you your means to protect yourself. We're going to disarm you. If you're reducing the police officers and your crime situation is getting worse, and we know now from the discussions you heard earlier with the 4,500 police firearms, that have been lost over the last 6 years. There's a little bit over 700 police firearms a year that is stolen or lost, not including the 9.5 million rounds of ammunition. and the AG's findings on poor record keeping around the CFR and stuff. If you look at that, and you know that with the notorious cases around 2004 and firearms being sold to gangsters in the Cape Flats by a criminal syndicate in SAPS, then we can't guarantee that firearms that get taken from the public during this intended disarmament is not also going to end up in the hands of the gangsters, being used to shoot at the very police officers and members of the public desperately trying to make their community safer. So no sane person can support this kind of this draft legislation. It's anathema to public safety.
JP, I just want to know, as a representative in local government, representing a sphere of government within our constitutional system, did the National Department, did the police minister speak to you even informally in putting together this bill? Was there ever an opportunity before it was gazetted?
No, sir. No, I will tell you that I've had the privilege to be consulted by one of the other deputy ministers recently about a different matter, but on the firearms legislation, no. And that is, keep in mind that we do have intermittent interactions with the National Police Minister. We reach out to him on various things like the extortion problems, the massive extortion problems here, which, can I just remind you, is committed by serious organized crime figures who they themselves and their henchmen and their families were extensively implicated in the firearm licensing scam and the problems in CFR and all the arrests that were made in the CFR and in SAPS and Gauteng for the enablement of those licensing, that licensing scam, that these people in this extortion racket are benefiting substantially from the illegal firearms being made available to them or dodgy firearm licenses being issued. So the problem there also is less with the legal ownership of firearms and with fallibilities within your criminal justice system, enabling bad people to own those firearms. And then to say, well, we'll make everybody better off by denying people firearms for self-defense is just lunacy, because the criminals are not going to disarm.
Yeah. And so, Andrew, I mean, presumably what somebody like JP, who deals with the situation, has to say is quite important to the content of legislation. So the minister declined the offer to attend this summit, but do you think that he is consulting anybody else? Is he speaking to anyone else about the contents of a bill like this?
Well, the one thing we must remember is it is a draft bill which has been gazetted for public comment, which is why this summit is so important, because we want to create more awareness in the public to submit their comments. Once the bill, the deadline is passed for comment, then the parliamentary process will take over. There will be public participation and engagement. What we would have expected, however, is for the Civilian Secretariat for Police, which reports to the Minister of Police, to have consulted more broadly beyond the state. In response to a letter by an advocate that was addressed to the Civilian Secretariat, asking who was consulted in the, the formulation of the bill, it was simply State Department. So, the South African Police Service, amongst others, the Airports Company of South Africa, etc., etc. No private stakeholders outside of government. And clearly from JP's comments, ministers should be having MINMECs, and they should be having MMCs, MECs, and ministers should be meeting regularly to discuss issues. This issue should have come up there. This issue should have been canvassed with all government partners, even if those governments are controlled by a different political party. We're not trying to politicize this issue.
But that's how you make good law. You listen to people with their experiences. John?
Yeah, I would sort of make another point, which I think has also been not as well ventilated. Gun-Free South Africa and Minister Cele like to create this perception that it's very easy to become a legal gun owner in South Africa. You simply walk into a gun shop and you buy a gun. They try and portray that's how easy it is. It's actually a lot more complicated than that. Now, I recently went through the process of doing the law module and then writing 3 unit standards for 3 different types of firearms. And I started, in Cape Town with an instructor. The day came for the testing to be done. There were about 16 people who started. There were only 3 people who finished the exam. It's very rigorous. It's actually quite a tough exam, and the requirement
and that's the lawful part.
And that's the lawful part. I mean, that's obviously
what criminals go through. Is
of course.
There are no.
So here you're a lawful gun owner. You want to own a legal firearm for either sporting or self-defense. You've got to go and do the courses. You get course material. You've got to learn it. You've got to study the act. You've got to go through. You then write examinations on it, and it is not a simple examination. As I said, I mean, there was Only 3 of us made it through at the end of that class. And then you go on to do a practical exam, and you have to be able to demonstrate proficiency with using the firearm. Compare that now to somebody who just goes to your local friendly, corrupt cop and, slips him a couple of $100 and gets issued a firearm. And, JP, I was very lucky to go out with JP and his unit to see the work that they do. And here's the other thing. I mean, thing that the City of Cape Town gang unit is doing, they're actively going out to look for crime and criminals and for illegal weapons. They don't sit in the charge office waiting for somebody to phone so they can get a number so you can fill out your insurance claim. They're actually out there proactively policing. And the biggest frustration in chatting to those officers, their biggest frustration, is that they said they're sometimes picking up the same weapons 3 or 4 times. And they know the weapons now by sight. They've said, we picked that, that's the same one we picked up. And they check the number, and there it is. Entered into the SAPS 13 room, finding back on the streets pointed at them again. It is massively frustrating for them. Now, I just wanted to demonstrate the difference between those two processes. Becoming a legal gun owner in South Africa is not easy. It is a number of hoops you've got to climb through, and that's beside the fact that there's a delay on being able to get your stuff. And Andrew and others were up at the Central Firearms Register, just walked through those rooms where there's just reams and reams of paper, that paperwork that's sitting there, it's completely unattended to. I think it is an important point to make, because Minister Clele, and particularly Gun Free South Africa, think, it's just a free-for-all. You go into a supermarket and buy a gun and you come out and, you're a legal gun owner. It is not like that at all. You also then have to demonstrate that you've got the right way to keep it, and then you've got to renew that every 5 years or 10 years, depending on the type of firearm. So it's not something that once you've got, you just keep it. You've got to keep renewing it, much like a motor vehicle, much like any other form of licensing.
An important point to make, John, is that Gun Free South Africa was invited to be a participant in the summit. I think it's an important voice on whatever side of the argument they are, but they did decline to attend.
I know why they didn't come, and I'll tell you why they didn't come. Because I can guarantee, if you look at the board members of Gun Free South Africa, I bet you that the majority of them have an armed response system at home. That there's an alarm company that when they press a panic button, when their family is under threat or they feel unsafe or their alarm goes off, they have a response from an armed response company. And they don't like the uncomfortable question as well, are you then going to be happy if your armed response service arrives with an OB-carry rather than a firearm if your family is in danger? And that's a big question we have to ask. You want to disarm other people who don't have the luxury or the ability to afford private security in their homes, but many of those people enjoy private security of their own.
So, Andrew, John mentioned the problem of illegal guns continuing to be in circulation, the police not doing what is meant to be done to take those illegal firearms out of circulation. And you mentioned in Cape Town, JP, you could speak to that as well, the same firearm confiscated from a criminal appearing at another crime scene. So we have a question from a delegate, Jamil Arendse, who asks, in this context, why does the government not use coded ammunition? Has this been tested with the police?
Well, it's a great point, and it was brought to my attention by Angus Mackenzie, who's on the panel today, that there is technology available. There's innovation that can help us to fix the problem without such a drastic solution to the inefficiencies of SAPS, right? So again, I'm going to come back to this point I made earlier. This solution is too simple. It's just lazy. It's not actually a solution at the end of the day. It doesn't target the source of the problem, which is the criminals. And if we can have coded ammunition and better systems in place that can help us to locate the source of a firearm and link it to a particular piece of ammunition, well, then all the better for it. The problem that we have is that the current government is not one of innovation. It is not one of trying to explore all the other options available, of which there are many, before proposing such a draconian piece of legislation. And we must make it clear. The problem here is not law-abiding, responsible citizens, as John has said. You've got to be trained. And if the training's not good enough, let's make it better. But don't criminalize law-abiding, responsible South Africans because you can't catch the criminals who are running around with illegal guns, which are already in circulation.
JP, I'm going to give the last word to you. Please keep it short because we have to wrap up this section.
Will do so. So I think Andrew is spot on with that by pointing out that this is lazy legislation. You're avoiding dealing with the real challenges you're faced. So here's the facts. In less than 5 years, the Cape Town Metro Police, specifically our Gang and Drug Task Team and now LEAP, brought 294 firearm-related cases to SAPS. But the SAPS investigative processes being what they are, with massively overloaded investigators and the other problems, only 25 of those cases resulted in convictions. That's 10%. So there's your problem, that you have completely overwhelmed police resources, where the national government has failed to make investments in the low-hanging fruits, specifically your detectives, so that we can get meaningful convictions. Disarming your general populace is not going to change that dynamic, but making appropriate investments where you can will. And I want to add also to what the point that Andrew made is around control measures. If you have weak control measures, then you get the kind of outcomes we talked about that the AG pointed out, with weak control systems, weak methods for dealing with firearms without serial numbers, etc. That's all in his report. By comparison, in the last 2 years, the city enforcement staff lost only 3 firearms, all 3 as a result of attack on our staff, of which we recovered 2. Proper control mechanisms do work and do bring the situation under control without having to, across the board, disarm and disadvantage everybody and prevent them from being able to protect themselves.
Thanks, JP. In fact, I'm going to give the last speaking opportunity to Regan from a provincial perspective. Do you just want to give your views on this discussion?
And as John was speaking, we were informed as recent as March this year that even though there is issues and corruption in the Central Firearm Registry, we even have a number of known gangsters that are legally purchasing firearms. So there's known gangsters that are legally purchasing firearms, and it's connected to one particular station in the Western Cape. And SAPS is aware of it, and it boggles your mind knowing that, yes, we have corruption, that we have SAPS is being under-resourced, they are understaffed, and they are undertrained, which is clear for everyone to see. And I do want to place on the table as well, I even fear for SAPS members. We've had close to 30 SAPS members that have been murdered in the line of duty for this financial year, which boggles my mind that here we have a SAPS minister that isn't doing more to even help SAPS that are overworked, overburdened. Detectives that have a case docket, it's 50% of all detectives here in the Western Cape have a case docket of between 200 and 250 dockets, whereas the international benchmark is between 20 and 30 case dockets to ideally work. So I even fear for SAPS members that we have seen how national is even crippling provincial SAPS to a large extent.
Thank you to our panelists. That is all we have time for under the segment. We'll be back right after this. Rural communities are some of the most vulnerable victims of crime in South Africa. Rural homesteads, including those of farmers and farm workers, are built far apart from each other and so are isolated. In the absence of rural safety units, the police simply don't have the resources to protect these communities. Today, we will discuss the impact of the proposed bill on rural safety. Joining us on Zoom are Francois Rousseau, Executive Head of the Agricultural Association, SAI, and Annette Steyn, DA Shadow Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. But first, we have a message from the Western Cape Minister of Agriculture, Dr. Ivan Meyer, who unfortunately could not be with us in studio today.
As the Western Cape Minister for Agriculture, I have first-hand experience of the safety issues in our rural communities and across South Africa. Farmers and agri-workers are living and working in remote areas, often without cell phone signals or telecom lines. This makes them more vulnerable than those living in urban areas across South Africa. We have seen a drastic increase in farm attacks in recent months in South Africa, and the gun bill will remove the last source of self-defense for our farmers in South Africa. South Africa cannot afford to put our farmers, our agri-workers, and our food security at such a huge risk. They will be more vulnerable to farm attacks. We must oppose and stop the gun bill. I call on all South Africans to take action and force the South African government to stop the gun bill, or we, the people of South Africa, will stop it. The safety of its citizens is the primary responsibility of a government, but the government in South Africa has failed in its duty and its constitutional responsibility to protect its citizens. Thus, citizens have a right to defend themselves. The Democratic Alliance understand and appreciate the role of agriculture in South Africa, and we owe it to make South Africa a safer place for all its citizens. South Africans must wake up and stop this government in South Africa from passing a gun bill that is irrational, illogical, and unlawful.
Welcome, Francois. I want to start with you from the perspective of organized agriculture. Just perhaps bring us into the picture. What is the rural safety situation? We listened to Ivan Meyer, the Western Cape Minister of Agriculture, but from organized agriculture, what is the safety situation of farmers and rural communities in general?
Hi, thank you. I just maybe want to discuss this, from an international angle and the campaign that we are currently driving. The United Nations announced the Decade of Family Farming in 2018. And the reason for this is because the United Nations and its affiliates realized that farmers are in the best position to end poverty, end hunger, achieve food security, stop climate change and end migration from rural towns to cities. But in order to achieve these goals, you have to have a safe environment, an environment that's required for family farmers to practice their vocation and to ensure the future of a new generation of family farmers. But in South Africa, how are we able to do that when we have about a farm attack every 2 days and a farm murder occurring every 5 days? So how do we protect ourselves as farmers without a firearm for self-defense? And also, should this legislation pass, do we see a new generation of family farmers entering the fray? And in a country where food security is so critical, how will we encourage these farmers to do this when they are not able to protect their families? We know that South African farmers are vulnerable for a number of reasons. One of them being our geographical challenges. But more importantly, we've got this political incitements. I'm talking about songs like "Kill the Farmer, Kill the Boer," that really doesn't help the situation, and farmers are aware of this. And I'm not going to talk about the incompetence of SAPS or their ability to react to a farm attack, but all data and case studies clearly indicate that farming families' ability to survive a farm attack is first and foremost dependent on their preparedness for such an attack. And in order for them, if they shoot back, they have time, they can buy themselves time through self-defense for the neighborhood watch and perhaps the police to arrive on scene. So I guess this whole thing comes back to the point that Helen made. How is it rational to pass this bill that will make us criminals for protecting ourselves when the state-sanctioned body, which is the police, cannot protect us by their own admission?
Annette Steyn, I want to bring you into the discussion. Very often the impression is created that the farming community is so completely vulnerable to attack that no matter whether they have the means of self-defense, they are going to be victims in any event. There's a wide recognition that rural safety and the police's role in securing rural safety has completely collapsed. And so the argument is that all firearms in the hands of farmers and the farming community will just be stolen and end up in the hands of criminals. Is it accurate? Do we have cases where farmers and members of farming communities have in fact used their guns to save lives and to fend off attack?
Yes. Thank you very much for that question. I think it's a very valid question. Unfortunately, I don't have stats about that, but I think it is well known that especially in the last year or two, a lot of criminals were shot and killed when they tried to attack farmers on their land. And I was thinking when I listened to Angus earlier, when he spoke about people phoning the police station when people are trying to attack them in their farms, on their houses in Bonteheuwel. What happens in a rural scenario is farmers have a lot of lines of defense. The first one is cameras outside the houses, fences, dogs, and then guns. Children of farmers grow up learning two things. The one is they learn to drive, and the second one is they learn to shoot. It is a normal thing that we do on farms. People practice. They teach their children from when they are little how to be able to shoot. It wasn't really always how to defend themselves. But these days, listening to what Francois was saying of an attack on a farm every second day, it becomes a self-defense test, even with your children on farms. So we have seen in the last year or two many places where when attacks happen, farmers, their wives shoot back and kill the criminals on the farms. What is also becoming problematic is once that has happened, it's as if the police then criminalizes already the farmer for defending themselves. And I think that is one of the reasons why this bill is suddenly now on the table. The fact that people are actually shooting back and killing people when they are being attacked. So it's also maybe something that we can look into.
Francois, what would you say to that?
No, I totally agree. An armed, well-trained, law-abiding citizen should be seen as an asset, not a threat to national security or to the people around him. I think we get reports of farmers, weekly that were able to ward off any criminals because they had firearms. You see, that is a deterrent. If somebody knows that's a farmer with a firearm, he will be much less likely to intrude or to attack that family than when he knows. In the case of this bill being passed, the chances are much better than this guy not having a weapon, especially if it's a young family. So no, I totally agree.
Francois, as I mentioned before, I have to ask some devil's advocate questions here because participants like the Minister and Gun Free SA declined to attend the summit. So I have to ask you, what do you say to the argument that the guns that farmers have is just an opportunity for criminals to obtain weapons and to steal and to use those guns in the commission of a crime?
You see, if you make that argument, then you should be living in Wakanda, where we start off and everything's clean and beautiful and everybody has no guns. You start off with a base from no guns, but you can't do that anymore. There's been a lapse of time where everybody has gotten guns and even criminals themselves have weapons now. So now you want to de-arm the people who have arms to defend themselves in order for those farmers not to give up more weapons to criminals. It just doesn't work like that. You can't argue like that. It's just not possible.
And Annette, just tell us from the perspective of agriculture, the Portfolio Committee on Agriculture where you serve, was there an attempt by government in general to engage farmers about these realities before this bill was gazetted? So we've heard that the public now have an opportunity to comment on the bill, but usually before something like this is gazetted, there is an indication that this is the policy that government wants to, this is the direction that government wants to go into. And so there is some consultation with people who have access to crucial information to make sure that whatever you gazette is already potentially good law. Was there an attempt, and this is a question to both Annette and to Francois, by government to speak to farmers and the organised agricultural community?
No, Steer, there was no attempt at all from our portfolio perspective in any case. I'm also not sure that they tried to speak to anyone in the agricultural sector that I know of. We have been trying from our side for a long time just to get rural crime or what is happening on farms being debated in the portfolio committee so that we can have some kind of discussion. We have asked for joint meetings between agriculture and Ministry of Police or the Department of Police to discuss the rising issues of crime in rural areas. It's not only attacks, but it's also theft that is massively increased in the last 2 years that needs to be discussed. I wanted to say with the case of Bontejevel, when you live on a farm, it's not 1 or 2 criminals that come and try and attack you or steal from you. People arrive in groups from 10, 12, 14, and many times with weapons, AK-47s and others. So, it is quite violent on these farms. So I would have thought that this kind of discussion would have taken place with the portfolio committee, or at least that we will be taken into consideration when the discussion of the bill comes to Parliament.
Francois, did anybody speak to SAI and to the forums where you participate in about this issue and how this bill will affect the farming community?
No, there was no consultation. But, I attended an event on the 29th of April 2019 where President Cyril Ramaphosa had a question and answering session. And the whole reason for the event was to talk about land rights and expropriation without compensation. And one of the offhand remarks that he made was, you are as passionate about your land, but once we are finished talking about your land and property rights, we are going to start talking about your guns. Because South Africa should look like Vietnam and China, where only the police and the army officers are the ones that have firearms. And that was when you knew this thing was going to get to the table some other time. So I'm really not surprised. As Helen also said, nothing surprises me anymore, and more of the conspiracy theories are starting to look like reality.
Yeah, so Francois, that is an answer to people who say that this is just a conspiracy theory. Listen to what ministers and officials of the government say themselves, their own account of what's happening. Just to conclude, Francois, what will SAI do in response to this bill?
Well, our board chairman, Dr. Theo de Jager, just finished visiting Hungary and officials there. He's also now back in Rome to fulfill some of his duties as president of the World Farmers Organization. But we are definitely going to make a big push into the international arena with this campaign, and also locally. We already have a campaign busy where we are trying to get firearm owners who handed in their firearms during the amnesty process or whose applications are just pending, busy with a campaign to get those firearms back, because we believe if this bill passes, that it shouldn't be used to take away their guns. So, we'll be going both defending and opposing this current bill, but also trying to get firearms back that was handed in during the amnesty process.
Thank you, Francois. And Regan, I want to ask you here. So clearly, communities in Bontejevel, for example, and farming communities have got a common interest. So despite their different circumstances, they've got a common interest and a legitimate right that this bill seems to threaten. What is the importance of getting communities and groups and organizations involved in order to oppose this bill?
I think it's important. I think it's key for us to talk about it, to talk more about it. We have here in the Western Cape, for example, we can argue that we have more gangsters than SAPS members in the Western Cape. We have on record that there's more drug houses than SAPS stations. And drug houses are often linked to organized crime, so there is money flowing. So we do understand that there is a problem, but one thing I also realize is that we see that when SAPS work, they can do it. We've seen in certain operations, SAPS can do it. However, we would want communities to know that there is not enough political will, there's not enough sound leadership, and communities need to speak up. They need to have street committee meetings, speak to people, have social media campaigns around this bill, because it is going to negatively impact each and every person in our country that wants to see a safer country, that wants to see safer communities. So people definitely need to join the conversation, talk more about it, but we need to galvanize this in a way where we are able to be, like we said earlier, to be on the right side of history.
Annette, is there anything that we've missed in this discussion on how this bill might affect rural safety and the situation of farmers, farm workers and rural communities?
I don't think there's anything that we have missed. The only thing that I can say is wherever I have been and spoken to people, it's not going to happen. People are not going to hand in their weapons. It is the safety at risk. We have seen it. It's not going to happen. So I think we just need to keep on pushing and making sure that this bill does not proceed in the way that it's currently on the table. And also sensitizing people, make sure that they are aware of this and that they must pull in the speak about this, that they will not do this. That's all I can say.
Indeed, it is a matter of life and death. We will be back right after this. In recent years, we've seen a raft of laws that propose to change the constitutional compact on which democratic South Africa was founded. Government is pushing to amend Section 25 of the Constitution, which threatens our right to own property, and they are proposing to nationalize healthcare, which will take away your right to choose your doctor and the healthcare of your choice. And now government wants to take away your right to protect yourself. Civil society groups have been at the forefront of fighting for citizens' rights and uniting people around a common constitutional cause. We are now joined by Gideon Joubert, co-director of DSA, Jacques Broderick, AfriForum's campaign manager, Jonathan Deal, national coordinator and director of the Safe Citizen campaign, and Dr. Frans Cronje, CEO of the SA Institute of Race Relations. So, welcome, Jonathan. I'm going to start with you. You've heard the contributions that have been made here by various participants in the summit. What, in essence, is your view on this proposed bill?
Thanks very much for this opportunity. I'd like to just make a short statement to put the context in for this segment, and I'm very happy to relinquish my schedule later in the morning if it'll assist. So with your indulgence, I'd like to proceed on that.
Please feel free to do so.
Thank you. Good morning, Mrs. Ziller, Mr. Steenhuisen, Mr. Whitfield, and fellow panelists. I appreciate this opportunity and look forward to ongoing robust conversation on this issue. I think it's a sad state of affairs when the ordinary citizens of a country have to mobilize against their own government to protect their physical safety. Yet today in our country, that is exactly what is happening. And out of this crisis is born Safe Citizen. As an organization focused on community safety and security, we're here to represent all South Africans, whether armed or unarmed, who are facing a wave of crime and a threat to our personal survival. Every new day heralds a fresh crisis in the South African police services, as we are greeted with a new headline reporting on the downward spiral of service to the citizens that the SAPS are expected to protect and to serve. From a broken DNA process to the stalling of the very system that the SAPS use to control their own firearms. On top of that, we see public fights at the highest levels of the police, with generals openly defying the minister and long-standing widespread corruption at senior levels in the force. Meanwhile, the under-equipped and poorly paid frontline staff must face the music with the public. And so the public have no faith in the will or the ability of the police to protect them. All the while, violent crime is proliferating in our country. Robbery, rape, and murder have increased since the time in 2018 when Minister Chele told Parliament South Africans are living in a war zone. In fact, law-abiding citizens are attacked in the street and in their homes and churches, and the police themselves are facing an unprecedented level of violence against uniformed officers. The minister is so concerned about the level of violent crime that he has increased the money for VIP protection to 1.7 billion, whilst reducing normal expenditure and freezing increases for the staff who actually do the police work. Into this melee, the ANC believes that it is justified to launch a bill that would effectively strip law-abiding citizens of their rights to be free of violence, stripping them of their most effective way to protect themselves and their families from the plague of criminals in South Africa. On what does the minister rely when triumphantly floating this ridiculous bill to the public? Who does he blame for the rate of murder? None other than lawful gun owners. He actually places the blame for guns in criminal hands at the feet of law-abiding civilian gun owners. And so he has arrived at a simple solution: disarm private people and the problem will go away. Civilians losing guns. Really? We've heard stats this morning. Here are some more. While the police lose over 20,000 guns and 10 million rounds of ammunition, and every attack on a military installation or police station yields yet more automatic rifles for criminals, and the SADF cannot account for 82,000 guns, while senior police officers sell thousands of guns directly to gangsters, while Ekurhuleni Metro reports more than 700 guns missing. While the pre-1994 arms caches of political parties have never been surrendered, and those guns are at large in our communities, and while our porous borders see a flow of unlicensed guns every day, and finally, while it is common knowledge that a criminal can buy an AK-47 for less than 1,000 rand, it is apparently law-abiding citizens that are to blame for guns in criminal hands. This state of affairs defies logic. And for Safe Citizen, the draft amendment bill represents nothing more than the political ideology of the ANC, an attempt to permanently disarm every private person. While it is important to follow the law and submit comment on the bill, we should all be moving to reject this bill in its entirety. The bill is completely out of touch with the reality of life in South Africa, the reality of life for tens of millions of people who don't live behind high walls in gated communities, and a reality very far from the best protection that our ministers enjoy every second of their lives. To the political elite, I say, give up your armed guards, give up your convoys of blue light BMWs, go and experience life on the streets. And in closing, a message to President Ramaphosa. Mr. President, this bill was not hatched in secret. You have known about it for a long time, and you are aware of how lawful private gun owners have been treated at the hands of the Central Firearm Register and the government. You cannot simply wash your hands of it. This bill pretends to be concerned about public order and the security and protection of citizens, when in fact, if it were passed, it would bring about a massive destabilization of public order and further risk the safety and security of law-abiding citizens. It flies in the face of Chapter 12 of the NDP, which requires your government to build and sustain safe communities. Safe Citizen rejects this bill, Mr. President, and calls on you to instruct Minister Chele and the Secretary of Police to withdraw it entirely and to deal properly with law-abiding citizens. In closing, a lawfully armed citizen keeps your community safe.
Thank you, Jonathan, and we'll get back to you. I just want to move to Jock now. Jock, I can imagine your views on this are quite similar to Jonathan's. What is AfriForum's stance on this bill? Jock, we need to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, apologies. I thought you were muting it from your side. Yeah, so I think anyone with half a functioning brain will share most of the speakers here's sentiments regarding this legislation. So let me thank you for the opportunity and also congratulate the Democratic Alliance on organizing this event. I think by now everyone present are well aware that government's reasons for these ludicrous amendments to the Firearms Control Act do not hold any water. The campaign is based on lies, outright lies, and apparently thumbsuck statistics. And I think these amendments need to be scrapped in its entirety, not just debated, not amended, scrapped. Word and forbade. It's not acceptable in any way. I would like to talk about the importance of fighting draconian legislation like this, not just the Firearms Act, because the ANC is playing a very long game here. The South African government has been increasingly power hungry, and they've launched an attack on our freedoms on various fronts. Not only do they want to disarm law-abiding citizens, but they also want to implement other unworkable legislation, such as the National Health Insurance Act, and nationalize our property, and that is property, not just land, it's property, through expropriation without property compensation. Then there are far-reaching proposed amendments to the Procure Act, for instance, that will literally impact every aspect of our daily lives and basically become a tool for government to prosecute anyone they feel like on a whim. Because there's no way that you can follow the Procure Act without being guilty of committing some kind of an offence, according to the new proposals. So the ANC government has made it very clear that they do not have South African citizens' best interests at heart. Rather, they want to solidify their own power and rob us of our freedoms, and that we cannot allow. But it does give me great hope to see so many organizations and political parties and individuals come together to form a united front against this ever-encroaching totalitarian machine. And we will have to keep this momentum and cooperation going and fight back against every attempt to demolish this country's democratic DNA, because that is exactly what they're trying to do.
Thanks, and I want to turn to Gideon from the perspective of DASA. What has the public reaction been to your attempts to draw attention to this bill?
Good afternoon, and I will do my level best to give you a quick appraisal on that. Just to start, Dear South Africa is a public participation platform. Every single submission that goes through us ends up at the originator, in this case, the Civilian Secretariat of Police. We do keep a record of it, as well as publicly count them, and we essentially keep these records in the event of future use, as well as at the end of every campaign, we do submit and create a publicly available summary of all the submissions, sort of an executive report, executive summary. Now, prevention is better than cure, and it's better to shape policy as it's being discussed and debated than to try and get something done about it once a bill has already been passed. And we found in many cases that the apathy of citizens is a far greater threat to our democracy than the tyrannical state. However, this has been so far a very successful campaign with basically just hit 100,000 submissions through the DRSA platform. The overwhelming majority of these submissions have been in opposition to the proposed amendments, and a very large segment of those have been opposing the bill as a whole, as opposed to just picking a specific section. Now, the opposition against the ban on self-defense, or rather the repealing of self-defense as a valid reason to own and carry a firearm in South Africa, has been the most visceral element. But as I've stated, the overwhelming majority or a significant majority of respondents that have opposed it have chosen to oppose the bill as a whole, and offered an extensive number of reasons why. So this has varied from the importance of sports to sports shooting, not just from an economical perspective, but also from a perspective of maintaining a proficient, well-resourced, well-trained, knowledgeable base of firearm owners, from to hunters and collectors, hunting obviously having well-established backwards and forwards linkages to tourism, to conservation, to agriculture. The list is extensive. There have been many, many interesting comments that have come through as well. I mean, one specifically in reference to self-defense and citizens being mostly on their own due to the dysfunctional SAPS, where the person said, we cannot win a Durban July with donkeys, and we cannot win the fight against crime with a broken SAPS. Hence, the civilian or the citizen is always the first responder to their personal crime scene. And
taking it forward from these submissions as to what the next steps would be from the Dear South Africa side, we will most certainly be considering possible court action. Since we could represent every single participant, they are now an official stakeholder, and that's a potential of 100,000 plus stakeholders. So it's been the public reaction to this has been energetic. It's been thorough. And in the overwhelming majority of cases, it's been well reasoned. So, yes, I'm quite confident to sit here and state that the general public as a whole oppose this bill in its entirety and would like the entirety of the bill scrapped. There have also been, as have come on the screen throughout the summit, suggestions of a solution to license the person and register the firearm, which I think is definitely something that should be explored in the wake of this.
Thanks very much. I now want to turn to France Cronier from the IRR. France, you have written quite a bit about how the ANC makes decisions based on a balance of forces. So when conditions are favorable to advancing a certain ideological agenda, they do so. Is this bill part of that agenda? How does it fit in? And could it tip the balance in some way?
Well, it's definitely high, everyone. It's nice to be. It's definitely part of that because it's not supported by any data or proper deep socioeconomic research. And my guys have looked at the common arguments, there are 5 of them, made by both Gun-Free South Africa and its supporters and the state about why civilian disarmament is important. And I thought I'd take you through those 5 arguments and show you how to dismantle them. The first argument, I need to look at my notes a bit here, is that there's a positive correlation between firearms in lawful civilian hands and levels of serious and violent crime in the country. Now, we've been able to trace that claim back to quite a well-known chart that was published by Gun-Free South Africa. And I asked the guys to dig into that chart and try and understand how it's put together. And when they did so, they found a very troubling thing, that it is assembled not from one, but from a series of separate data sources, which are then put together in the form of a trend line to suggest that the first Firearms Control Act did bring about a steep drop in gun-related crime. Now, if you did that at a university or something, your professor would send you straight back to a course on methodology. So what we did is we did it properly. We used consistent sources over time. So we started with the murder rate. And the murder rate does fall both after the introduction of the Act and then its operationalization a few years later. But it was falling faster in the years ahead of that than it fell in the years after the operationalization of the Act. So the Act just simply was a point in time that fitted into an existing trend line. Thereafter, once the Act was properly enforced and the relicensing and so on processes began to work, the murder rate in South Africa again began to rise. And when I close for you, I'll tell you what we thought was behind that. The next data set we used to test this relationship is armed robberies of houses and armed robberies of businesses, because these are the kinds of crimes that are likely to be reported, more likely than others, and not all reported, and where guns are likely to be involved. And what we found is that those crime rates increased by between 100 and 200% in the aftermath of the operationalization of the first draft of the Firearms Control Act. And more so that this happened through an era where the police's data, for what it's worth, suggested that there had been a decline, quite a significant one, in the number of firearms in lawful civilian hands. So that first claim, the positive correlation, doesn't stand up to scrutiny, and it's based on the most spurious, either ignorant or blatantly dishonest research. The second point that the anti-lobby makes is that guns that are stolen from civilians or lost or taken off them in robberies are a significant contributor to overall levels of serious and violent crime in the country. So we had to look at that. And if you consider the numbers, maybe 5, maybe 10,000 in a year, depends, and you weigh that against weapons lost out of the security forces, and you weigh that against the number of weapons present in South Africa's frontline states, a consequence of the hot wars of the Cold War, and you weigh it further against the fact that probably for at least 20 years, the armories of the state have been so badly managed that I don't think the state can claim that it has any real sense of the number of weapons that sat in those armories or still do, or what the location of those arms are. And very small sort of corroborator of that is a point you were making earlier about guns taken off criminals and then appearing at future crime scenes. If that's happening to a gun that's recently captured in the police's records, you can only imagine what's happening to the historical arsenals. And the conclusion we reach on that one, the civilian guns contribute to crime, is that they are probably such a small part of the overall available pool of weapons that are available to criminal elements that removing them would make no difference to overall levels of violent crime. But it would make, of course, a very great difference to the civilian who's been disarmed. That person would become much more vulnerable. The third point made by the lobby relates to a woman killed by their intimate partners with guns. And the lobby claims that there's data which shows that the number of gun-related intimate partner homicides fell very fast around the era of the introduction and then later operationalization of the first Firearms Control Act. And the critical point the lobby makes is that there was no weapon substitution. So people who killed their intimate partners didn't move from guns to blunt objects or to sharp objects to kill their intimate partners. And they make that claim quite boldly, but that's completely bogus because we dug into that data as well. And we found that while it appears there's no weapon substitution, there is a vast increase. I think it's from about 3% of those homicides to something in the 20 percentiles of where the homicide is committed according to the records through brute force. So you beat someone to death. The effect of that, right? So socioeconomically, it's probably not something that could have happened, and it raises questions over the data to begin with. But it secondly demonstrates that the thesis that women were safer because there's no weapon substitution is wrong, and that what decline there was in intimate partner homicides is simply part of that broader dipping trend of murders in the country that I opened with you for you with. The fourth point that is made is that non-intimate partner homicides, where women are the victim of the murder in question, fell because of the introduction of this act. Now, that again falls apart when you do the scrutiny of it, because what declines there were are simply part of the existing broader trend line of falling numbers of murders in the country that preceded the act, preceded its operationalization, and then continued in its early years before reversing for reasons I'm about to get to. In any event, and the chaps made a very good point here, the proposal of the government is not to disarm men, but to disarm everyone, including women, which would not, I'm sure, improve their circumstances in the event of being a victim of gender-based violence. If a state that claims to be doing this in the name of gender-based violence to protect women is in practice disarming them. The fifth point, and this is the most famous one of the lot that the lobby makes, is that you're 4 times more likely to have your gun used against you than you are to defend yourself with that gun. Now, we dug into that one, and really here you have to say it is only dishonesty that allows that claim to stand. It's based on a study conducted about 20 years ago in 2 suburbs, or broadly police precincts, in Johannesburg along Louis Botha Avenue. And the study was structured in such a way that it would probably identify the great number of cases of where a civilian who was armed was shot or wounded or killed in the course of trying to defend themselves. But the structure of the study was such that it could not possibly identify examples, or the great majority of them, where a law-abiding member of the public successfully defended themselves. And the author of that study would later go on to correct Gun-Free South Africa and to say that the study does not show what GFSA claims it does show, but they have continued to make that claim ever since. And I'm not surprised you said they weren't willing to join you today, because I would have put these points to them. And certainly on the latter, they are dishonest. What is it? What do we see in overall? Well, the data on guns and the use is very weak in South Africa. We don't collect the level of detail we need. The origin of a gun used in a crime, the type of gun, long gun, short gun, sporting guns, different kinds of guns. The states now, for example, trying to regulate muzzle loaders more strictly. I would be hard-pressed, I think anyone would be, to identify an instance of a serious armed robbery committed with a rifle from the American Revolutionary War, which really goes to show what this is all about in the end. The data is, however, unambiguous in one sense, in that it shows quite clearly that the passage of the First Act did not bring about a significant drop in levels of serious and violent crime most likely to be committed with guns. But it is so weak that we would be hesitant to go further than that. If we were pressed and told you must reach a conclusion on this weak data in the same way that the anti-gun lobby does, that conclusion would in fact be the opposite of what the lobby suggests, that the disarmament and any reduction in guns in lawful hands in this country appears to correlate with an increase in levels of serious and violent crime. But that is not our conclusion. The data is too weak for that. It's only the conclusion that's reached if you force us to force the data into a conclusion. And that is it from us. And thank you for asking us to come and talk to you today.
Frans, you've indeed done a great job to refute many arguments that we invited others to come and make here, but as you mentioned, that offer was declined, and we honestly do want to understand the other side, the motive, the purpose behind this, and going back to the ideological program of the ANC. Where would this fit in? Just very shortly.
Well, I mean, it fits into the idea that's an independent citizenry and not dependent on the state for its welfare or employment or income, healthcare or safety and security, is a much safer long-term proposition for the state than a society in which people are independent, are free to think for themselves, are free to own property, free to earn their own incomes and look after their own families, and in this case, free to protect themselves in the event that they fall victim to a criminal attack in circumstances where the state is unable to come to their rescue.
Thanks, Frans. Jonathan, just give me an indication of what strategy your organization is going to follow in order to hold government to account and to understand what the actual information is that underlines this bill. Jonathan? It seems that Jonathan has left the room. Then I'm going to ask that question of Jacques. What is your strategy going to be?
Sure, thank you very much. Locally, we've obviously been pushing this campaign very hard, trying to get everyone to sign the different commentary sections and the bills and the all the different commentary that's been reached out by many different organizations. And I think it's also important that we emphasize the fact that people who don't own guns and who aren't interested in owning guns should also sign these amendments and these commentary sections and add their names to it, because this is a big onslaught on freedom. It's not just about firearm ownership. We've seen this, and I talked about it early on. It's a push on various levels to encroach on our freedoms. So we're trying to get as many people as possible to sign those amendments, to hand in their commentary, and then also we're busy pushing to create international awareness. And I think a very important thing that started happening automatically, and that the DA has also shown today, is that we need to get all these groups and all the interested parties together and form a united front. Because as Frans said correctly, the ANC makes these types of decisions on looking at a balance of power. And I think we've come out very strong and shown them that we're not going to sit back, we're not going to hand out our guns, we're not going to take this nonsense. And I think we need to continue with that stance and stand strong.
Gideon, my next question would be to you. What would you say to folks who don't own guns, who aren't interested right now in owning a gun for the purpose of self-defense? Why should they put their names to this campaign and support the efforts of these organizations to stop the bill?
There are two things important to it, and they're but tenuously related. The first and the most important one is as a subject of civil rights in our democracy as a whole. I think it has been very well explained today by all the other panelists that once you zoom out of this particular issue and you take a broader view of the wider assault on our civil rights and freedoms and our individual liberties that have been forthcoming for the past year and a half, well, much longer than that, but if that very energetically began to manifest itself over the past 18 or so months, it's very difficult to, if not impossible, to see this in isolation. The concept of the state being obsessed with attaining the sole monopoly on the lawful use of armed force. And I suppose if you look at the number of abuses perpetrated against citizens by the SAPS and the SANDF over the past year and a half during lockdown, also the monopoly of unlawful use of armed force against its own citizens, that is a very worrying thing. And the concept of 2.5 to 3 million legally armed, responsible firearm owners as a civil body, a civic body of resistance against armed crime, and to another degree also of governmental tyranny, that is a genuine deterrent. From the other point of view, if you also don't own a gun and the civil rights issue may not be of immediate application or effect to you, think of firearms in the sense of a vaccine against violent crime and criminals. And armed citizens create a sense of a herd immunity. It is a implicit deterring factor, considering that criminal, unless he actually works at the Central Firearms Registry and is leaking sensitive information, doesn't know that you are armed or disarmed. And therefore, there is a risk of you being targeted that you may not be the type of target that armed and violent criminal wants. And obviously, the more citizens that become legally armed and proficient, that deterrence factor increases. Now, the opposite, and I might be speaking a bit anecdotally here without any scientific evidence, but it stands to reason that you remove that from society, you remove law-abiding citizens carrying guns for their own protection, their self-protection, the protection of others, then there are no real consequences for violent criminals targeting you. And that is a concern.
Thanks very much. Our in-studio panel will next take into account what has been said at the summit and offer concluding remarks. Thanks very much. So, Andrew, what is the DA's next move going to be in response to this bill?
Well, I'm very pleased to announce that the DA has garnered over 75,000 signatures on our petition, which is a remarkable achievement. We've heard Dear South Africa has garnered over 100,000 submissions. We are busy putting together a comprehensive set of comments, clause by clause, to oppose the bill, which we will submit on the 4th of July, the day before the deadline on the 5th of July, and that's very important for people to remember. And we're also running a campaign across the country. We've got physical petitions actions on the ground in communities. We've got leaflets to generate awareness. We've been hosting meetings with communities that are affected by the legislation, concerned citizens, and we're going to be continuing this campaign throughout the legislative process. And I think it's very important to understand, once again, this summit was really about generating awareness about the arguments for and against. Those who are for the bill have chosen not to be here, and we've heard comprehensive submission today by those who are against. But it really is about creating awareness so that we can sustain this campaign throughout the legislative process, which will then be taken over by the parliamentary committee, the Portfolio Committee on Police, where we will continue to express our views based on the facts and the evidence that you've heard here today.
Thanks, Andrew. And obviously, it's important for the DA then to also cooperate with these other organizations, NGOs that were here at the summit today to make sure that the full force of the opposition is applied to the bill.
But also other political parties, Silius. So I believe that there are members of all political parties or supporters from all political persuasions.
Including the ANC, by the way.
Including the ANC, who have some very legitimate, as we've seen, legitimate concerns about the bill. And one of the issues that Frans touched on, which I think is important to remember, this is not just about firearms, and this has been discussed today. This is about the limitation of individual rights and freedoms versus what the state perceives to be in the public interest. And we saw during lockdown exactly how the state conceives public interest in South Africa and the limitations they put on our individual rights and freedoms, and they are unable to balance those two. And based on Frans's input, it's very clear that the arguments used to sustain the public interest perspective fall flat when put under scrutiny.
Regan, what was your big takeaway from the summit?
I am deep. I have hope that more and more people are speaking out. Here in the Western Cape, we will continue to hold SAPS accountable. We will continue to make recommendations to see how we can fix what is wrong. Earlier on, I spoke about the destruction site in Pretoria. We have been consistently calling for a dedicated site here in the Western Cape in order to mitigate the challenges that SAPS is experiencing in that regard. But I do have hope. I feel that more and more people are speaking out, more and more people are coming to the party in realizing that this draconian bill from the ANC will be negative for each and every one. And Andrew might enjoy this, but I'm even considering now wanting to get a gun in the absence that it's my choice. I would still want to have that gun, and I feel that that is
an exercise of freedom.
Yes, that would be my freedom. So thank you to everyone that was part of it.
And of course, hope and optimism is obviously very important in this country. Helen, what was your takeaway from today?
Several. I think I'd like to join what Regan says in that people are beginning to understand that apathy is not an option in South Africa anymore, and they're joining the dots. They're saying, well, your freedom might have been taken away on another issue, and I didn't bother about it because it wasn't my freedom. But suddenly, when they join the dots of all the freedoms that get taken away, one understands the centralizing authoritarian state that wants to tell everybody what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do, and our constitutional rights and freedoms are chipped away bit by bit by bit until they're not there anymore, and until all the institutions of state that are supposed to protect our rights and freedoms have become part of suppressing those rights and freedoms. And it is critical for South Africans to understand that. We've been banging away on this for about 20 to 25 years, and these single issue campaigns that bring lots of people together are a wonderful mechanism to join those dots and to get people to understand that these single issues are crucially important, but we need to see how this erosion of rights and freedoms has been happening and what the long-term implications are. That's my first takeaway. My second takeaway is of the importance of evidence-based decision-making and policy-making and law-making. It was fascinating to hear France demolish every one of the arguments of Gun-Free South Africa, and I'd certainly taken it as axiomatic and vanzelfsprekend that you did run a very high risk of having your firearm taken away from you and used against you, and that may be one of the reasons that I have never owned a firearm, don't intend to own a firearm, and have never even fired a firearm ever. I haven't even handled one. But the bottom line is that this goes down to people's fundamental rights and freedoms, and that's what the DA is there to defend. And that is why we must play a key role in these single-issue campaigns until every South African has joined the dots, that if you don't speak up until only your right is being affected, you will find that there's no one else left to protect your rights.
And insist that you check the facts on which these arguments and proposals are made.
Absolutely. The evidence, the data. France honestly said we don't have enough data, but if he was pushed to come down on a position on the basis of the data that there is, he would say that limiting civilian ownership of guns has no impact on the extent of violent crime that is committed with firearms.
And the onus should be on government who proposes that.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're going to propose a law and come out brazenly and say, we've come out with this law because it's going to reduce gun-related crime, because most crimes are committed with guns, or most violent crimes are committed with guns, murders are, then the onus is on you to show the correlation between disarming law-abiding citizens and the reduction of violent crime committed with firearms. The onus is on you. It's not on us to prove that that's not the case, although we're the ones who are proving that. But the state must be forced to say what the database is on which they reach the conclusion that underlines the bill.
And there you have it. As a colleague of mine has said in a different context, we are in politics to make a difference, not to be hand-wringing victims of circumstance. And this is also the case with this bill. Please stay tuned for some very important information. Thank you to everyone who participated in this important discussion. From the beginning, we've said we wanted to unite people and organizations. We set out to create a non-partisan event, a summit in the interests of all of South Africa's people. People from all walks of life and different political persuasions are standing together to oppose this bill. This is not the United States or Europe. We don't have a government with the wherewithal to protect people from crime. The police have said as much. The proposal to disarm lawful licensed firearm owners in the face of brutal, overwhelming criminality is a death trap, and we refuse to be caught in it. We thank each and every one of our delegates who participated in today's summit, and we look forward to defeating this bill together. In the coming days, we will be sending the Police Minister Bheki Cele a digital copy of the summit, so he won't be able to plead ignorance. Remember, you have until the 5th of July to comment on the bill by sending an email to comments.fcabill@csp.gov.za, and remember to copy the DA in your email at stopgunbill@da.org.za. You can also sign the DA petition at stopgunbill.co.za. We cannot give up this fight. We can't let the criminals win. To all our viewers on social media and at home, thank you for joining us and participating. Stay strong, South Africa.